Hi guys, today we're joined by Mr. James Thompson. He is an international agricultural ecologist. He's an expert in small-scale farming systems, agritourism, and value chains. He's also an entrepreneur and very much into community development. Mr. James, thank you for being from the island.
It's great to be here.
Um, if I can just start by getting you to introduce yourself, what are you doing here? You've been all over the world, Africa, Asia, Middle East, you worked in your domain. Can you explain to the audience what exactly you do and what you're doing here?
Great, yeah. I think Sri Lanka was a good stopover point between my home in Australia and working in other countries. And that's what brought us to see Sri Lanka the first time. And yeah, it's a wonderful place to be. It's got a great climate, it's very friendly, it's very safe. I think that Sri Lanka is a good place to be. It's a lively and vibrant country, with a young country, and so it's good. It's a very nice place to be.
Okay.
And I didn't come to Sri Lanka the first time until in 2011. And I always think to myself, oh, I should have come here. I should have come here, 20 years earlier. And that I'd always I just knew that Sri Lanka was having a civil war. It was perhaps not a safe place to go. And I grew up in Australia, and there was a number of Sri Lankan families that lived in our community, and some teachers in our school from Sri Lanka as well. And think, they were always good and polite and nice people. And that really, the one thing I'd say about Australia is that Sri Lankans seem to integrate into the Australian community very well. And I don't know whether it's a post-colonial system that we all grew up on a similar operating platform. I don't know about that, but that's what I knew about Sri Lanka. And so ultimately my work, I studied horticulture originally, and horticulture. So that's the study of plants and plant propagation of seeds, and the growing of fruits and vegetables really, and ornamental plants and gardens as well. And something in that took me overseas, and I worked in a number of different countries before spending quite a long time working in agriculture in East Africa, based in Kenya. And so that was where, wow, everybody, if you went out to dinner when I was a young horticulturalist in Australia, people would say, oh, that's very interesting. And whereas when I got to Kenya, everybody is a farmer. Everyone wants to talk about their farm, what they're growing. And so it's a wonderful thing to me to be working. And also the interesting thing, I guess, it's where I first discovered small-scale farming, and to see subsistence farming, and then cash crop growing, and then the plantation sector, and how that all fitted together. And that was really interesting to me, and to see the differences between the way small-scale farmers grew their crops and how the large-scale farmers grew their crops. And this is where I started to get an understanding of traditional agriculture systems, high biodiversity. So when in farms, the not using chemicals and artificial fertilizers in their production. And I think, gee, at the farm we've got all of these pest and disease problems, and we have a very high cost of buying these inputs from outside the farm, but you're not using that at all. Well, of course not. We play the game when we come to work because we're given instructions of what to do in our work on the farm. But here at home, we do it like this, and you start to realize planting things together, and so that this farm that you could see might be there's lots of different plants growing, and there's a sheep tied up and grazing in one little area, and there's the cow, and the chopping of the fodder for the cow, and the manure and compost being spread on the farm. You realize, there's a whole system inside this, and this is the modern version of an agricultural system that had existed in the Mount Kenya area for a really long period of time. And so that set me to thinking that there are things that we could integrate from traditional agricultural systems into our modern plantation system, increasing biodiversity in crops, alley planting, things like this, to start to look at the benefits of having higher biodiversity in the land that we are farming. So that was in Africa. Then I worked in, I went back to studies and I studied ecological agriculture at the University of Sydney. So
you were inspired in Kenya?
So yes, that was really my inspiration. And similarly around Kilimanjaro, there's the traditional agriculture systems. In Ethiopia, there's a different traditional agriculture systems. And you think, wow, this is amazing. And I want to know more about that.
How old were you when you started taking an interest in this?
I guess I would have been in my mid-20s, late 20s, yes. And going back to Australia, I was living in my hometown. My parents were getting older and needed some support at that time, so it was good to have some years at home. And then I decided I had a number of clients that were developing farms. There was a change in the agricultural system that was happening in our local district, which had been a dairy farming district on the south coast of New South Wales. And the farms were tending to be sold and bought up by people that would have them not for dairy farming, but to build a nice house. People from the city who say, oh, we'd be really interested in having organic agriculture. And so I was searching for how can I get an agricultural, ecological or organic agriculture consultant to do some organic agriculture management system development for plans for these farms. And so then finally, the internet was just starting at that time, and so getting in touch with the University of Sydney, and I talked to a guy here there who became a very wonderful mentor for me in my journey in the development of my ecological thinking and in understanding of how agriculture fits into a system. And it was so much I'm thinking, wow, this is really like in East Africa, really, isn't it? That it's about the community, the farmers, the farm, the biodiversity in the farm. It's a systems thinking, as opposed to just a flatline thinking about how you grow your food and how we supply food to ourselves. So I had an ecological agriculture degree there, and so I did that degree, and I was feeling very inspired about that, and saw the benefit of what I was learning, not only to Australian farms, but also to farmers in many other countries. And I sort of have the feeling Australian farms are very large-scale farms, typically. Farmers are often heavily in debt because that's just the nature of farming, particularly if you don't have reliable seasons. And in some districts, let's say in Western Australia, that they used to say if you had in some farming wheat growing zones, that if you had one good crop in 5 years, that you will be financially stable. So you could plant the other years, but the rain would not be sufficient to get a crop. And this then, if interest rates start to go up, well, this puts pressure on farmers, and so then puts pressure on the land to try to get more out of the land each year. And so, yeah, it took me back overseas, and then by good fortune, I was able to go to Germany and study at the University of Kassel at Witzenhausen, and I did my postgrad in ecological agriculture there, where so much was revealed about value chains and creating unique products and traditional foods and all of those sorts of things that really resonated with me from what I had seen and what I'd experienced in Africa and in other developing countries. There's nothing I like more than going to a new country and going into the fruit and vegetable markets and meeting people there and talking to them and seeing the trucks offloaded or the pickups being the delivery of whatever, and talking to people, and then following that back to farms and seeing where that product has come from. And then that's always a great experience to me. And just similarly here, to go to Dambulla and see how the whole system works and how food is being supplied from the farms into that location, and then feeding Colombo, really, isn't it?
I have to admit, when I go to the grocery store You'll kind of go and you buy your fruits that are all packaged nicely, and you don't really think about where did this come from? Like, what did it take for all of this to get here for me to just walk into the store, buy that, and nobody really thinks about this in the postmodern world. Can you talk a little bit about what it actually is behind the scenes, the value chain that you had just described? What does that look like?
And I guess there is differences between where that retail point is, whether that's in a wet market, in an open air market, or whether it's in a supermarket.
Right,
and
sure.
And so when you look at that value chain, I guess it's all about the preservation of value as the product moves from the farm to the market. And not only the preservation of value, how do we preserve the value is to maintain the quality of that product. So the product is able to be stored at a temperature or transported in a way that it's not being squashed or it's not being bruised, to ensure that its shelf life then can be as long as possible when it gets to the destination. So this is also then to look at, if we look at the traditional market of fruit and vegetables that a farmer grows, it takes it to a middleman, probably buys them from the farm gate, takes them to Dambulla and aggregates things, and then they're all loaded on a truck, and then they're brought to, and so that could be at ambient temperature. They're brought to an open market here, and then we see them spread along the roadsides being sold. If that can happen quickly, and again, if the end consumer is not having refrigeration or a large amount of refrigeration in the home, we would see in typical traditional social systems of urban people, often then it's going to the market in the morning, buying fresh produce, making the food for lunch, and then again in the evening walking. That's what mum's job is, or that's what someone's job is in the family, to go to the market so that you're consuming the food that you're buying on the day. So you're not having leftover food, you're not having food stored in a refrigerator. Once that system changed, and in many Western countries, as more and more women became full-time employed, the idea of going shopping every afternoon, you see the scene of madly driving home, picking up son from soccer, picking up daughter from music, driving to the supermarket, rushing in. I've got to get home, I've got to cook dinner, I've got to get the kids fed, we've got to get them in the bath and then put them to bed. And so, it provides a convenience. There's parking. And so as society changes, the choices that consumers are making about where they go and purchase their products also changes. And we start to see that if the product is chilled when it's soon after harvesting, and it's maintained at its appropriate temperature all the way along that value chain, and that it ends up in a supermarket where it's also held at that temperature, we may find that the vegetable product or the fruit product that has been picked today will have an X number of days of shelf life. So this is where we start to see the use by stickers on products in the supermarket, that this is expected to be able to, if it's correctly been transported, it's been correctly stored at the right temperature, it's in a packaging perhaps that is also having a modified atmosphere inside the packaging, it can last, say, for 13 days. And so if you can get that from the field into the shop by, say, day 5, you're able to tell that supermarket, well, now you've got 8 days. You don't have to sell it today and then throw it out. You can, this under these conditions of production, chilling, handling, grading, being carried in a way, and a lot of that when we look at people stuffing into a big sack at the farm, and sacks are being loaded onto a great big lorry, and guys are walking all over the product that's inside there. If you're a brinjal inside that bag, I'll guarantee you that a significant number of those brinjals are very bruised, and so they may be sold to a lower level market, that a cheaper market, that this is the waste.
Right.
Whereas if things are from the farm put into a plastic container that's stacked, they're not being crushed, they're being kept at the right temperature. If they're being packed in the pack house, it's also at a good temperature. The product is being tipped so it's not being bruised. if it's being graded, and so it ends up in that packet or in that container in the supermarket. And so this is the way of preserving value. So you're looking at not only building value as you move towards the market. So we think that the most important thing is to sustain value. So the product, the brinjal that has got crushed or the banana that's got bruised, that your product, as it moves from the farm where it was in perfect condition, it starts to go downhill until you see the bananas in the market and think, oh, I don't think I'll buy that one. But until the end of the day, when someone says you can have all these bananas for 50 rupees, think, well, they're not that bad, that people will make a decision. But they're not getting the premium value that they would have had if they'd been preserved and handled in a correct way all the way to the market. And so when we look at the development of the supermarkets marketing in Sri Lanka, these are the sorts of things. When we go into the supermarket, we start to see products that are of good quality sometimes, and not and it's about consistency, to be able to have the same thing on the shelf that people come to trust. The development of the avocado industry in Australia, for example, was people didn't want to buy avocados because one time you buy it and it's great, another time you buy it doesn't taste good, another time you buy it it's rotten inside, and they cost me $4, and I don't want to take the risk. And so this was a huge work done by the Growers Association, Avocados Australia, was to get some consistent quality in avocados, size, the way that they were grown by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of farmers, to get a consistent quality product until Australian consumers came to trust that when they bought an avocado, that it was going to be good when they got it home, that it was at a level of ripeness. So having an equal ripeness goes right back to how do you bring your trees into flower so that all of the fruit on the tree are of a similar level of maturity at the time that they mature and go down. So one isn't more ripe and one's less ripe, and then that one was always hard. Oh, I bought this avocado at the supermarket the other day. It was, I kept it for 2 weeks and it was still hard. And so building trust in a product, developing that product, and then getting the farmers to be able to grow, training farmers to be able to grow that product and see the benefits that they receive by producing a consistent product that's wanted by the market has created a huge industry of avocados. It's a good example, actually, of a modern value chain development for a crop that perhaps 20 years ago people in Australia didn't eat a lot of avocados. It was considered to be something exotic. Whereas now, if you don't have smashed avocado on your toast when you go to the coffee shop, it's something wrong with you. It's and so that has grown a market. The market that has promoted avocados, the image of Australian avocados, then opens the market in Asia to be able to export Australian avocados into other countries. When we have free trade agreements with other countries, that you're able to then send your agricultural products to those countries as well. So the free trade agreement that Australia has with the United States, I don't know whether we've still got it or not, but it meant that Australian avocados could be exported to the United States, and similarly for New Zealand. And so because we're in the Southern Hemisphere, our season tends to be at the opposite time of the year to many northern, equatorial or northern hemisphere countries. So when it's our avocado season, it's not the avocado season in Europe or the United States. So that we export our avocados to there, and we may, under the free trade agreement, is that we would expect to see products coming from those countries into Australia, and people would say, that's incredible, isn't it? I bought an avocado and it said, product of Peru, or product of, hello from Florida, or something like that. Or I bought an orange and it was from California. I'm not going to be, a lot of Australians say, I'm not going to buy that stuff. You say, yes, but we send all of our oranges in the orange season to California, and we send our avocados to that country, and that's the way it is. And so, when you think about agricultural value chains, we can think about them in, let's say, in Sri Lanka, from the farm to the outdoor market or to the supermarket. where is the farmer going to get the best return, or where is the most value going to be created in those value chains, and is the cost of things like refrigeration, packaging, bulk handling, this whole thing, the cost of doing that per kilo, is the market willing to pay for that? I did some work in Cambodia many years ago now, and the proposal, the great idea is that that 30% of the food that was produced on farms in Cambodia, it was estimated that 30% of the food was lost either at the farm in the what we call the post-harvest, after harvesting. So after it's harvest, 30% of it is the squashed brinjal or the squashed banana.
Wow.
And so that's a loss. And so if the farmer has been paid for that, even if they've paid the equivalent of 10 rupees for the product, if 30% of it is lost, you have to transfer the cost of the lost 30%, that you've still paid for it. And so it goes along the value chain. And so everywhere that products are losing their value. And so looking at how to reduce the cost to a food value chain from post-harvest losses and waste. And so this is the other thing in the irony of the difference between a developing country where poor transport systems, poor handling systems, poor storage systems, not only for fruit and vegetables, but for rice or for wheat or for beans, for all agricultural products, the shortage of capacity to store products, whether that's short term, if something's shelf life is quite short, or something that has a very long shelf life, that how do we store it? How do we maintain that value? That concept is that we're not losing value, we're not wasting the product. In Western countries where, and I think Australia is probably a good example of that, is that it's all really great. So the losses, post-harvest losses, have been minimised, but where the loss happens is what happens to become waste. So I'm in the supermarket in Australia and I see this great big bag of spinach and small spinach leaves for my salad. And I think, wow, look at that. It's 500 grams and it's only $6. I'm going to buy that. It's on special. But how much of this sits in your refrigerator and then gets put into the compost bin or just into the general waste bin? And so then we see that the over-purchasing of products, the over-indulgence of cooking large amounts of food. And so we would see about an equivalent 28-30% is estimated that food is wasted in other countries, and so in Western countries. And so you've got the loss of food, 30% loss of food in a typical developing country value chain because of poor handling and because of poor management of that product as it moves from the farm to consumption. Whereas in the West, the loss is a waste. And so finding, if we look at affordability to Australians at the moment, because the cost of living has increased in many countries, not only in Sri Lanka, to look at how do I use everything. And so being an older person, my parents had experienced their childhood in the Great Depression. And so you're very well trained of not to waste anything, eat all the food on your plate, cook exactly the right amount of food, that however many people are in the family or friends are over, you cook the right amount of food for the number of people that are eating, and that's it. You don't have any waste. We don't have the refrigerator we would go shopping as a kid on Thursdays, and Thursday afternoon we'd go shopping. We'd have 1 week, we'd go shopping and do the general shopping, and then you had pay week when you do the bigger shopping, and that my mother had in her mind every meal that she was going to produce with what was being purchased, and so you didn't have a large amount of waste, and you can always cook something else with it. You can always use it, but not to be just throwing out, digging in the bottom of the fridge and getting out these plastic bags and thinking, wow, that's wasted. And so it's very interesting to see the way that agriculture has moved, and a lot of, say, policy of agriculture in many countries is, we're looking to how do we increase yields, how do we increase agricultural production, that we want the land to be squeezed so that it gives us more and more and more production. yet how much attention is really being put in countries where there may be food insecurity, where there may be a deficit of food for many people. How do we put the investment into storage? How do we try to reduce that 30% of loss that's happening to the agricultural production? Because if we are able to do that, we're able to also then reduce the cost, because the cost of the lost 30% isn't being transferred into the remaining 70% of the product that's being taken to the market. So if they can take the whole 10 kilograms, let's say, the cost per kilo is able to be reduced because they're not trying to sell 7 kilos and get their money back for the lost 3 kilos.
Right.
And so looking at the movement towards containerization and logistics, and not this type of investment that typically that's the private sector is doing that, and so the supermarkets, in their own interest, they don't want to lose the value, they don't want to have the waste, they want to have very good quality products on the shelves of their supermarkets, so that when people come shopping at the supermarket, they'll buy their fruit and vegetables there at the same time. They don't come to buy their milk powder or their milk or the various dry goods that people would buy at the supermarket, and then go to the local fruit and vegetable outdoor market. And so supermarkets are missing out on that if they want to have that quality product of fresh products. And really, let's say in Australia, in Europe, that it's the fresh products that the supermarket offers that draws the people into the supermarket. And so if you've got to have good quality bananas, and I remember one place I visited, a branch of Lidl in a supermarket in Germany, and the manager of that supermarket told me that bananas make up 1% of the total turnover of his supermarket. And he said, so that's why I've got the bananas front and center there, and I've always got good quality bananas. And similarly, to have great fresh fruit and vegetables, this is what brings people, it makes people feel that there's something wholesome, there's something fresh about this retail space, and so they'll come there and do their shopping there.
Very interesting, very interesting. From an ecologist perspective, what have you kind of learned from the way that developed countries do it to a country like Sri Lanka? Do you think that they are degrading their agricultural ecosystem with big companies basically consolidating the agricultural process of things? And then you have countries like Sri Lanka, Kenya you were talking about, where everything is much small scale. Like, could you talk about maybe the pros and cons of either?
Sure, and I think that there is the traditional agricultural systems tend to be much older agricultural systems that have evolved over, in the case of Sri Lanka, 2,500 years of agricultural being practiced in Sri Lanka. And so those systems of agriculture, the observation of nature, so that farming, even though it was a modified system, the tank system, the irrigation system, or the shifting cultivation systems that are the sort of the famous traditional agricultural systems of Sri Lanka, that this was evolved out of nature. So if we think about how did people move from being hunters and gatherers to being cultivators, and that in all parts of the world. And so, say 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, you started to have this change, that people started to stay in one place. So they became sedentary as opposed to moving through places, collecting foods and moving on. If we look at the Indigenous Australian people, that was their tradition, is to keep moving so that you're not having an ecological excessive impact on the land where you are at that time. So if you're hunting and gathering, collecting, I come from the coast, so collecting shellfish or fishing or eating traditional foods and then moving. And so they were people who were always on like a dreaming trail,
Was
as
that
people
was
refer
that
to
an
it.
intentional use of mobility because they thought if we stay in one place we're going to extract too much, eventually we won't have anything, so we must move? Is that something that they realized?
I don't know. I think it was very conscious, and then we look at modern studies that see that the deliberate, say, burning to create better young grass that will attract good hunting animals, kangaroos and those sorts of animals, and then the creating meadows of different types of indigenous foods, yams, let's say, like yams and things like that, in which aren't yams of the West African type of yams or the type of yams that you have here, but they're unique Australian indigenous products. And so these bush foods are the traditional fare of people. And what's conscious or what's just, this is the way we do things? Do we make a plan to be, it is just people are part of the earth and part of nature, and this is the way that over time, often I think moving on would be going into clean areas. The population density was very low, but in a lot of places when you look at the herdsmen, say in Asia or in North Asia, that people moving on to so for a disease management point of view, for example, both for their livestock and for themselves, this was another motivation behind moving and being pastoralists, for example. So you're moving to good food, and so where people changed from being hunters and gatherers and perhaps moving, then becoming that animals, keeping animals. Why do we have, say, cattle, sheep, goats, horses, camels in South America, then alpacas and the other camelid that's there?
Llamas.
Llamas, that's the one. And so there's really, out of all of the animal species on the earth, and elephants in South Asia, that there are very few species that became sort of domesticated, and some of those species, let's say dogs, for example, would start to follow the hunters because they would get some meat, and then they bond with that community or that family, and then they see, there's a benefit of having this dog around because it barks at night if intruders are coming, or a tiger is coming to eat us, those sorts of things, that animals then became domesticated. So rather than going and hunting those animals, that people start to herd those animals, and so they're moving with their animals to and understanding the season and where the good feed would be. Other people became sedentary in one place, and so then in some descriptions they say this is when humans became enslaved to farming. By having sedentary farming is that you have to be cultivating all of the time. You're not just going and collecting what you need and having enough and being fed. You need to have a responsibility. So in lands where there was a high level of productivity, so that people had enough food to eat, that getting enough food to eat and to be secure and to be safe and dry and all of those things, have enough skins for in cold climates to keep yourself warm, have enough firewood, that those things, when it produced sufficient food or excess amounts of food, some people could not have to do farming. So they might be involved in part of a spiritual or religious roles within a community. Some might be working in health roles within the community. So specializations start to happen, and so that when you look at by the time of the Roman Empire, that there were many specialists, and they had thousands and thousands of slaves in different parts in North Africa was their granary, and so that they really had an agricultural system which proved to be really unsustainable. That farming that land was part of it didn't work out after a number of perhaps hundreds of years.
Why is that?
And so, well, we look at soil. If we go and clear land, even if it's in a semi-arid or a seasonal rainfall area, that natural vegetation that's on a piece of land, so that could be a great big forest, or it could be shrubs, or it could be small trees. So this is usually an association of different species. That's the typical natural vegetation of a forest. Then we cut that down. So all of the the organic matter in the soil that's been feeding that forest that might have been there for thousands of years has built up, and so that can be an enriched land. So when you clear it and start farming on it, the land is quite fertile and it produces the crops that you want. It feeds you. And so this is when we look at some of the traditional agriculture systems of Sri Lanka. Chenna, is it Chenna? I think it's called Chenna, is a shifting cultivation system. Not completely clear filling the land, but clearing, under clearing, planting your crops, growing that for a short period of maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, just depending on the situation, and then clearing another piece of the forest and moving to that, and that forest regenerates. So this is the principle of shifting cultivation systems that we see traditionally throughout, let's say, from New Guinea to Sri Lanka to many parts of Asia, that shifting cultivation has been, that was the way that agriculture was practiced. And that's the way you got enough nutrients left in the soil, because you use the forest to create the nutrients in the soil, and then you keep moving. And so perhaps you wouldn't come back to that place by the time population started to increase and people sort of had their area that they moved within because of population pressure. When there was low population in the world and in those sorts of societies, you could just keep moving wherever you wanted to, felt like moving, to shift to a new area. But if you're going to be farming on this area and preparing this area and living here, and so you want to sort of move around yourself and your community to who are also farming and doing their thing. Some communities are working together, so it's not just a one farmer concept as we would see in many countries today, that it's a community of people who are farming together and relying on each other, keeping each other safe. If some of them are having illness or health problems, for example, that they can have, your farm isn't stopped because you've got the flu or feeling a bit unwell. So that this is families and clans and communities of people that would farm together. So this was a sustainable system. In other, the landscape of other places where agriculture developed, let's say in Mesopotamia, in sort of northern Iraq, Iran, Kurdistan, this sort of area, that in the Tigris and the Euphrates River coming through Iraq there, that the selection of grains, growing the first wheat, choosing the first grains that, that one grew really well, that one had the tastiest grains, we'll keep those grains and we'll grow them. And so agriculture developed in different ways, but in really similarly in Central and South America, in Asia, in China, Asia, in the Middle East, and in that Fertile Crescent, that it's a similar time it started to emerge. And I don't know why that, there's a number of different conjecture about why this happened, but human society started to change and farming started to be the way that people, if they had a reliable rainfall season where they could harvest and store to feed themselves throughout the next season, until the rains came again and you did it all again, that would tend to keep people in one place. If we look even, Kenya, East Africa is a great example. In the higher rainfall areas, Mount Kenya, Aberdares, the Western Highlands, that people have intensive farming and they produce enough food so they can grow some tea as well, or they grow coffee as well, so they have some cash crops, which in the modern era pays for them, but they have a highly biodiverse agriculture system going on, which is a continuation and an evolution of their traditional agriculture system. And so for those guys, that they've been practicing that system for quite a long period of time, and it was sustainable. But so much of that, so often, that included livestock, and so being able to, the livestock are contributing their manure to the farm, so that's mixed in with the soil, and increases the fertility of the soil, and so the source of the source of the nutrients is coming from the livestock. the other thing is when we were talking about shifting cultivation, but we look at crop rotation. And so if you, let's say in paddy fields of Sri Lanka, we often think, well, why aren't they just cultivating every single paddy field all at the same time? You think, wow, look at that, it's rice growing season and that area is just left, and you might see a couple of cows and a couple of sheep tied up or something like that, because that's resting that land. And so traditionally, when land was bigger, you could rest it for longer before, and so it returns its fertility also through the sun, through photosynthesis, that grasses, and they're breaking down, they're living, dying, breaking down, adding to the organic matter of the soil. So when it comes time to say, I can see my productivity of my rice area where I'm growing that paddy over there, I'm going to develop this one for next season. And so that this renewal of crop rotation, as land becomes less and less and less, in Europe we saw the evolution of the ideas of crop rotation on the one site. And so we would see, let's say, all over the world, this was like a breakthrough idea. I forget how many, sort of hundreds of years ago, we're talking about that, that one crop should follow the other crop, should follow the other crop, because the benefits that initial crop will give to the follow-on crop. And so let's say in you've got sort of classic agricultural systems, and in Australia it was sort of the wheat sheep crop rotation. And so that was typically was a 7-year rotation. And so on my one piece of land I had sheep that were grazing on clover and grasses that were adding nitrogen to the soil. And then after 3 years of doing that, you know, this is sort of the ideal, typical idea of the Australian wheat and sheep belt farming. Then cultivate that land, and it's been enriched by the livestock and by the legumes, the nitrogen producing legumes in the soil. And then I plant my wheat on there, and then where the wheat was, I will perhaps plant oats, or I could plant other crops that are not going to suffer from the root diseases or the fungal diseases of the previous crop that was there. And so canola, or oilseed rape, is one of those crops. And when we look at the changing crop systems of Australia, we see that chickpeas, lentils, so to the products for new countries that Australia is exporting. There wasn't, when Australia was exporting its agricultural products, mainly focused on England in that right through until the 1960s, that there wasn't a lot of demand for chickpeas and lentils in that market. But as Australia's built trade relationships with the Middle East, with India, with Southeast Asia, that this is adding to the number of potential crops that an Australian farmer can include in that crop rotation on their farm. And so that the benefits of growing different crops at different times. And so this is how we're copying nature, still copying nature in that way. So how are we benefiting from the natural process of land, the natural process of the complementarity of either crops growing together or crops following on after each other. And more then farmers realizing that if I grow more than one crop together, wow, that's a good idea. So we could come and look at the traditional agriculture in many different developing countries and see that the old ways of agriculture is what we can learn from. And so this, for me, is why I wanted to study ecological agriculture, because I could see that in those countries in Africa, in Asia, that I'm seeing agricultural systems that we could really benefit, that the world could really benefit from understanding the ecology of those systems. And then how do we use that knowledge to evolve a modern agricultural system that's not seeing land just being degraded and the production of crops reducing. So that you're and you know, in Sri Lanka itself, the development of the concepts of analog forests, and I think his Dr. Ranil Sananayake, that in the 1980s is looking at what are the traditional agricultural systems of Sri Lanka and how can we copy the ecology of a forest? How do we create an analogue of that in making a sustainable and productive farm to producing healthy food reliably in a sustainable way? It's a very logical thing, and when we look at how we marry nature, the conservation of natural areas with agriculture, that these are concepts that is really great to think about that and to develop that. In saying that, that's what's good for the land, that's what's good for the farmer, that's what's potentially good for a consumer. And so that if we're able to eat healthy food, if we're able to eat clean food, we're looking that all of the whole value chain is benefiting from it. So it's a circle that starts with the farm, and then we look at then going out to the consumers. So then how do we, all of that energy is being created mostly by the sun there and the minerals of the soil, and that's then going and tending to then go into a city where through the agricultural waste, the waste of products, the food waste, through the process of the sewerage system, that a huge amount of concentration of nutrients is happening in an urban area. So the food coming from faraway places, it's coming and centralizing, and so we look at places like New York or Sydney as how do we manage this concentration of nutrients, and usually we dump it in the sea or something like that. And it's only in more recent times to think, oh, we need to process this, because once again, if we think about a concept of circular economy, we want to be able to capture, say, drying sewage sludge. And so we've seen since the 1990s a huge change in the way Australia handles that concentration of nutrients in urban areas and in towns to capture those nutrients, and which is coming from our excrement, and being able to put that back as fertilizer in the field, and not necessarily directly on food crops, but really in the pasture stage. So when you're growing the grass and the livestock are eating, that's where you would tend to use that in under Australian regulations. But the government has had to make that plan to see the benefits. They see how polluted a city like Sydney was growing for 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, 6 million, I think it's something like that now. So we can't just keep dumping it all in the sea and it washes up on, on Bondi Beach. My goodness, that, what will the world say if, Sydney's beaches are polluted? When I was first studying horticulture in Sydney, and you dive in and go surfing at the beach in Sydney, you very often come back with an ear infection, and you think, oh. And the smell of detergent coming off the coast in Sydney in the 1980s was very strong when the prevailing wind was blowing onto the coast. So there's that the users that you've got that levy when you're paying your rates if you own a property in Sydney. So everyone's has paid for the tertiary treatment, the capture of those nutrients and the recycling of those nutrients to put a much bigger proportion of it back into the land. And so this is really a circular economy where nutrients that have come in the food from farmland, so you're decreasing the level of nutrients on the farm, and you're taking them in the food that you produce, and then they get concentrated at that point of consumption, which is in a town or in a city. So then how do you get those nutrients and take them back to the farm rather than using other forms of artificial fertilizers? And so that's what the system that works. And so getting people to understand that, and say to do composting, for example, so that rather than throwing their fruit and vegetable peelings in the bin and sending it off to landfill, that many homes in Australia would have their compost bin, and so they're putting that into compost. They may have a small worm farm, and so then you're making a nice product that you can put on your pot plants, or you can put on your lawn, or you can put on your garden beds, and make your garden more productive in your home.
Are you suggesting that you could do this, that the individual could do this on a very small scale, like using waste And using that as compost, could you do that as an individual? Because that's a big process,
Absolutely.
Right?
And you
You
only
could.
need to go into Arpico and you can buy a compost bin.
So you're saying it's very common in Australia that
It's very
that
common,
practice.
I've got 2 compost bins at my house,
Okay.
and they work very well. It's perfect, and so then you're able to add that to the soil. You get the compost and put it in, mix it into the soil, and then so that's just like the prunings of the trees, the cutting of the grass.
So you'd encourage more people to kind of invest in this practice, even in Sri Lanka.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and there's no smell, there's no garbage when you're putting your garbage out. It's not got food waste all mixed in with it, and it's perfect. It's very good. Yeah.
Okay. I'm also curious, you were talking about this concept of crop rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that more part of the older agricultural system? Do you think it does not happen as much anymore?
Oh, it absolutely happens.
It
very
still
much.
happens?
Yes.
Is it dying off in certain areas, or is it still is it a set thing that all farmers would follow, just out of curiosity?
I would definitely say in agricultural systems, say in North America, Canada, Australia, Europe, that crop rotation is just a part of the benefits of crop rotation are so great that it would be unlikely that farmers would desert.
So modern day agriculture hasn't introduced anything that has kind of pushed
it's part of modern agriculture, and,
right?
We have to see this as it's like some type of continuum where that agriculture was made easy. We clear fill the land, and in Australia it was those first farmers think that of the European era in Australia. Oh, we've got to make those rolling hills of Britain, and so we've got to cut down all the trees and clear the land. This is the thing, and the development of agriculture, even up until in some states, the development of agriculture in Western Australia up into the 70s, that farmers were being granted or given very favourable low-priced land because the land all was publicly owned land to start farming, but with conditions you must clear the land, and so if you haven't cleared the land within X many years, you'll have to give the land back. But what was discovered is in those ancient soils in Western Australia, you've got a 3.6 billion year old, something like that, year old soil and natural vegetation that's grown, and the prevailing wind coming off the Indian Ocean across wide areas of Australia, that you've got salt that's come in the wind off the sea, the salt has come down in the rain or drifted down in wind over millions and millions of years, and not far beneath the surface of the soil there is a salt accumulation deeper in the soil. So the natural vegetation that's growing on that soil has got roots that go down and take up the water and release it through evaporation. When you take that vegetation away and start planting wheat that only operates in 10 to 15 centimetres of the soil, you started when it did rain. Thank goodness the rain came. It made my wheat grow. But when the rain was good, it also mobilized the salt that was deeper, and you didn't have plants that were sucking the water, sucking that water out of the lower part of the soil profile and releasing it into the air. So the salt rose up, the water level rose up, and then left the salt on the surface of the soil, and hundreds of, if not millions of hectares of agriculture in Western Australia, the land became salinated and was no longer suitable for farming. And people are saying to the government, we went and invested all of our funds in developing this farm, and we've worked for 10 years, and you forced us to do this and to clear all the land. And then the realization of, we need to leave like alleys and leave natural vegetation to draw up the water. What sort of things we could grow eucalyptus and have a eucalyptus processing, or melaleuca and have melaleuca oil processing. That how do we start an agroforestry system that does have deeper roots, rehabilitate this land, or if we're clearing new land, is there wildflowers? What are the different natural products that could come from including deep-rooted perennial trees inside, and so I can grow my wheat and my annual crops but still balance the land. And so all of these sorts of changes, it's different in every state, it's different in every country, in the agricultural landscape, but the most important thing is to be observing nature and seeing agriculture as an extension of nature, because we are part of nature. We can't see ourselves as humanity as being separate from nature, and I think this is one of the changes that's come about in recent generations, that we become separated from the earth, and we look at the traditional beliefs, say, of Sri Lanka and of India, that humans are a part of nature, that we are that type of thinking. Whereas some, let's say, from a Christian point of view, or from that side of view, in the way that I've been raised is, well, this was all made for us, mate. God made the world, and for us to use and enjoy. So go for it. And so the idea that we are separate from nature comes back from some thousands of years as well. That this is all here for us to exploit. And right. As opposed to the concept that come from the Eastern spiritual beliefs, is that this is something that we need to be in harmony with. And it's beautiful, as you asked me why I come to Sri Lanka, that it's beautiful to see that this still remains in Sri Lanka. That Poya Day is something that is important, that people are observing nature. We talk about the auspicious timings of things that happen. This is in contact with the universe, really, isn't it? Which is very different to the way we in the West seem to be becoming more and more and more separated, and not knowing it's a full moon, or not knowing that when the rain season is coming, right. that whole nature, rain is part of that nature, the seasons are part of that nature, the natural vegetation is part of that nature. If we look and learn and understand how that all fits together, if we are thinking about feeding ourselves, we can see a very good plan, a good way of ensuring that our land remains productive and producing healthy food. And so this comes into what we call sustainability. How can we keep on doing it? And in fact, we would hope that the productivity of our land is increasing as we farm, as opposed to decreasing as we farm. And so in this continuum of the evolution of agricultural practices, we hear a lot of talk in the West of organic agriculture, of ecological agriculture, of biodynamic agriculture, the different organic systems, different ecological agricultural systems. And I would say that most conventional farmers in Australia, while they may be struggling, thinking, oh, look at my fertilizer bill, look at my pesticide bill, look at the number of hours I have to have a tractor moving over my land, spraying pesticides on my crops. This is almost, I'm hardly making any money out of this. Don't worry, we'll say a tractor company, we'll give you very good terms on your new tractor, which might be actually compacting your soil and adding to the soil erosion problems that you've got. So there's been a whole lot of learning, and what we call now regenerative agriculture is a little bit of a step back from organic agriculture or a full ecological system, but it is a move towards thinking more deeply about it. It's not just a growing medium, it's living soil. It's not, oh, soil's just sort of soil, isn't it? It's right. Dead. It's not, it's alive. It's a living thing. And thinking about soil in that way again. And I'd say that continuum now is a little bit back to the future, that people, younger farmers in Australia, are definitely, how can I get more without spending so much money? And so their motivation may be feeling that I want to preserve nature, I want to plant trees, I want to have small birds that come and eat some of the pests, that can be, that there is an economic benefit to them, and also a social benefit to them, to see that a farming family has a productive, that they feel good about the place where they're living. I think that's a really important thing, and that that the community feels good about that farming system. So when we look at that from an ecological point of view, that the farm is really serving the community that it's feeding. and whether that's from the food that we eat, or whether it's rice, or whether it's fruit and vegetables, whether it's wine. We see in Australia, for example, that someone might have a proposal to plant a huge vineyard. We're going to plant a huge vineyard, and it's sort of, what's that going to do to the water dynamics of this valley? Or, we're going to plant a huge orchard for pecan nuts, for example. And so that the farmers who are also in that area the community have an input. Is this what we really want? Then it sort of gets onto, well, what's really sustainable is we're also going to put in a wind turbine generation on this land. And then some people say, isn't that wonderful? We're going to have natural electricity being produced in our district. Whereas other people say this is outrageous and they're very damaging and that it's going to cause, so it's change. And so I don't know the answer whether having a wind turbine integrated into an agricultural area is really bad, or whether it's good, or whether having solar panels over land is bad for the agriculture or good for the agriculture. Is it better or worse than saying, well, there's a whole lot of coal under this land, and so we're going to dig down 50 meters, remove all the soil, all of the farming has to stop, and we're going to get all the coal out of there because that's how we produce our energy. It's really a challenge to know what is the best, and each community and each country needs to think about what is the best for them. And from an international perspective, we realise with the debate about CO2 production and carbon and the long-term sustainability of the earth it is something for all of us, because what happens in another country is also affecting me in my country. And in some interesting conferences that I attended maybe nearly 10 years ago now, in the Middle East, in looking at how does food security and food sufficiency come for a country like the UAE or Saudi Arabia, which and other Middle Eastern countries that having increasing populations, but certainly have a decreasing natural water resource. And so where would we buy our food? And it was really interesting to see some of the speakers in those conferences that look at many of those countries have agricultural investment, government agricultural investment companies that may get 1 million acres in Egypt or in Kenya or in Tanzania or in other countries, and go and do farming and say, well, we're farming this area here, and we're taking that food to feed the UAE, to give food security to the UAE. And so, the discussion in this is this really, if there was a famine in that country, let's say that it was in an African country and there was a famine, do you think the military is going to be allowing you to take the food away to feed the UAE if they're starving themselves? Yeah. This was in Ireland in the 1840s, in the potato famine, that Ireland was still a net exporter of food to feed England, because England didn't have food self-sufficiency at that time. As from the learnings I've had from the early, from about 1770, early in the Industrial Revolution, that England needed to import food from other countries to have food sufficiency in the UK. And Ireland was very close and next door. It was very productive, and so a lot of food could come from there. So while the Irish themselves were starving, that island was feeding, and that's a well documented history. And so that sort of concept is, if the Middle East countries go and do farming in other countries, you won't be able to remove the food unless you go with your military and say, no, this food's for us. And so the best thing we could all work on together is food sufficiency for all the world. So the best investment that the Middle Eastern countries could make would be improving food sufficiency for all of the countries of the world, so that there is sufficient food supply in the world to be able to feed everyone, whether you're in an arid place like the Middle East, that you're importing food, but keeping the world price of food to keep food affordable, that's your best solution. And I thought, wow, it's really nice to be in a conference in Abu Dhabi and hearing these as the conclusions, and that the speakers from the UAE government and saying, yes, this is our responsibility. We need to spend money on having better food sufficiency for the world. So then we look on how do we then move. On the one hand, we're looking back at traditional agricultural systems, understanding the ecology of agricultural systems, and then we start to move on to, well, what type of plant breeding or what type of animal breeding do we need to do to be able to achieve the increase, to achieve this goal of having sufficiency of food around the world. Some of it, there's, I have seen in my years in Kenya years ago that there was abundant food in the market, but it's affordability. So when you say we have a famine in northeast Kenya, there's mountains of grain, but who's got the money to buy the grain and give it to the people who've had a failed season? And so this then becomes another thing. In many countries, you would have a strategic reserve of food, and it just wouldn't come that you've got to say 10 to 15% of the population is having food insecurity. Yet, as a nation, you've got an excess amount of food. So if the sufficiency of food for the world is able to be achieved, then it's about affordability. So if people are poor and they can't buy the food, this is then a challenge. That's another challenge. So having sufficient food for everyone is one thing. The affordability of food is another part of that. So that's the economics of feeding communities and having an equitable distribution of wealth in the world to be able to ensure that everybody gets fed.
How does that happen, James? How because you were touching on a circular economy. How would you put that into practice where everybody gets paid? Because are you thinking about a circular economy that's decentralized with small-scale farmers that completely, are self-sufficient and there's excess food as a result of that? Because the way I think that it might go forward is the large companies will consolidate the power, and then the affordability aspect of it is totally out of the picture. There's excess food because they have large-scale industrial agricultural practices.
Yes.
But they have a monopoly, so you can forget about the affordability of it, and then all the poor, hungry people will die. Because there's no negotiating with the farmers anymore, because the farmers have no negotiating power.
Yes and no. Okay. I think that the majority of food in the world is still produced by small-scale farmers, believe it or not.
Really?
Aside from the when we think about Africa, India, yes, there's large-scale farming, but the land is covered in people. So let's say if we went into areas of Sri Lanka where farming is already being carried out. So if you've got a land that's covered in small-scale farms, what are you going to do? Come and round up those people and throw them off their land, take their land away from them, get rid of their title deed or whatever tenure that they have on that land, and say, you have to go and live in a slum in Colombo now, or in Negombo, or wherever. And I don't think that that's a realistic proposition, that large companies are going to come and take all the land. If there is excess amounts of land, so let's say that there is land in part of Sri Lanka that is publicly owned land, and the government wants to encourage an increase in the agricultural production, and sees that land as being suitable, may have an irrigation scheme to be able to supply reliable water to that land. That would be a positive thing, but it would be up to government policy then to decide, would we be doing this with by allocating land to many small-scale farmers and increasing the area of small-scale farming? Would we see this as something that Colombo investors might like to get 10 acres or 20 acres. And I'm sure if you take a drive around in that peripheral area, say from Chilao to Puttalam, going Giriola, going up past Kurunegala, you would see that there's a lot of investment, a lot of people growing mangoes, a lot of people growing growing papaya, for example, growing crops and as a business. And so there is investment of a different type of investment from many. Some are small scale farmers, some are investors. But I don't know enough about Sri Lanka to know whether there are large areas of land, and that this would offset then loss of money out of the economy. That if we're importing products from foreign countries, if those products, some of those products, let's say that some of those products don't grow in this climate, and so I don't know that there are parts of Kenya that would be suitable to grow wheat, for example. Yet, areas of Sri Lanka, I'm getting myself confused now. Areas of Sri Lanka that would be suitable for growing wheat, I don't know, but rice definitely. So if you say, well, we export this much value of rice, or we export this much value of mangoes, and that offsets the importation of wheat, because we like to eat, as a modern society, we like to eat wheat, or we like to make chapati, or, and these are really not traditional Sri Lankan foods, are they? So that, where did the tradition of eating wheat products in paratha or chapatis comes from northern India and northern Pakistan, where wheat has been traditionally grown for centuries and centuries and centuries. But we like to eat bread. I guess the British brought bread to Sri Lanka in a modern loaf, and the same in Australia, that we eat sandwiches, we eat bread. Bread is a big part of it. That's really where its origins came from, and where then did it get developed by Europeans in bread in southern France, in Italy, in Spain, and those areas where you grow wheat. That wheat bread is the common thing, and it's great and it's tasty, and it's good that people eat that. We shouldn't be saying, no, you can't have that because it's imported. But if the country can afford that, and that's the sort of policy that the government needs to develop. But the idea that a large-scale international company would come and over thousands and thousands of hectares and then push itself and over the top of small-scale farmers, I don't see that as really happening in Sri Lanka. Over time, I don't know. Where are people going to live? And so it's probably more valuable in areas where you've got 2 acres, 3 acres, 4 acres, driving out around Katana, Dankatua in the last few days, northwest of Negombo. That land will urbanize, and it's been exactly the same from my observation in the urban areas of Tanzania, urban areas of Uganda, urban areas of Kenya, that the small-scale farmers that get smaller and smaller and smaller by generation to generation because of typically in those countries the inheritance of land by the sons of a family, the lots will get smaller and smaller until it becomes urbanized. Right. So what was agricultural land, and my grandfather is saying, my grandfather used to have 25 acres here. And then he had 6 sons, and then it was cut up, and then they had 4 sons, and what you end up is with a 10-perch residential block. And so that's more likely, because where are we going to go? So if you push the people off the land, where do they go? And so unless there's jobs to go to, that people are deserting agricultural areas to go to work in an urban area and work in industry and work to get their income that way, they don't have anywhere to go. And so it then becomes, for example, what is that American author, Steinbeck, is The Grapes of Wrath, that the Okies from Oklahoma, once industrialization, the first tractors came along since 1920s, 1930s, that the people are just cent broke. They're all so in debt to the bank that they've been digging and labouring and growing cotton and growing. And then once we had tractors and large plows and caterpillar tractors that we don't need hundreds and hundreds of small growers that are all indebted to the bank and have to sell their product to. We don't need human labor anymore. We've got machines, so we want big farms here, and so that they were pushed off their land, and that's the story of the grapes of wrath, and they went to California, and just the whole movement of agricultural migration, people after some generations moving off the land in the United States to California, where there was more intensive production of fruits and vegetables, and they saw it. It's like going to Romania or going to the UAE, that life's going to be better there. And when they got there, and you need to read the book. It ends in tears, that's for sure. But it is really a social comment about that changing demographic of agriculture in communities in different parts of the United States with agricultural industrialization.
Right.
When we look at a country like Australia, and I'm sure the same here, that agriculture was a huge employer, that people lived on farms, people grew things and sent them to the city. But some of Australia's major political party has been formed in rural areas, because that's where up until the First World War, say the early part of the 20th century, that's where most people were, and that's where most people worked in agriculture, in agricultural towns, and on the trains and the loading and all of the shearing of the sheep, the whole thing. It was a labour-based industry, and it was the biggest industry in Australia at that time. Then, as industrialisation happened, that people moved to the cities. Farms tend to become bigger, so by one neighbour buying out the other neighbour, buying out the other neighbour. So we have seen a change. People move from the land, because you ask any Australian farmer and you say, so do you think your kids are going to follow you on in running this farm? Oh, no way. My kids are going to go to college, or my kids are going to go to university.
Going to work at Goldman Sachs.
I don't want them to be farmers, and it's a tough life. But it's a good life. Farming is to be in nature, to be observing, to breathe fresh air. If you can keep, and this is where it's good to have an ecological based farm, that you feel it's in balance, that you're in balance with the nature of the farm, and yet you're able to grow a healthy crop, and you're able to feel fulfilled, and that you're not degrading the land or the environment through what you're doing. I'm sure there's no farmer who wants to look at his land and see it washing away, and seeing the local river brown with the soil, and that's your that soil's your asset, my friend. And you're watching it wash away, and you think, I should have left those trees down that gully, shouldn't I? But I needed an extra couple of acres to get more productivity. And so it's only by a learning experience, and this continuum that I'm talking about is that more farmers learn about ecological systems, we have more understanding, they move towards regenerative agriculture. This is happening on a large scale with large scale farmers in many Western countries at the moment. And when we think then about artificial intelligence, how we think about technology, and so there are some technologies that would be from an organic agriculture certification system to say that most organic production standards don't accept GMO products, genetically modified organism products, so that something that's been gene edited in a laboratory, that's not acceptable to all organic agriculture standards.
Could you elaborate on GMO just for a second, James? Because are you talking about GMO in the sense, because there's the lab version, and then there's the, like what we spoke of, the breeding version.
So since the development of agriculture, people have been choosing the best one. And let's say from apples, what did the apples look like? There's the original agricultural research centres in England. There's one famous, I forget its name now. It's where apple breeding happened, and so the original apple might have been a very small, hard thing, but it was seen to have potential. But then you could cook it and it would go soft and think,
Right.
wow. And so then selecting ones that by collecting the seeds or taking cuttings, growing new ones, and think, oh, look at that one's slightly different. Oh, that's actually got a bigger fruit on it, doesn't it? And that's, oh, it's sweet. Oh, I think we'll propagate that one. And so the selection, people realizing about this, the realization that plants having sexual reproduction. It's not so many hundred years ago, and it's great if you go to in Paris, you go to see where this realization happened, and that this pollen is the male part of the plant, and it fertilizes the female part of the plant. And if I take the pollen from another one over here, I get something different too. Some plants are self-pollinating, some so that the male part of that flower is fertilizing the female part of that flower, whereas others it's coming from another same species plant but blowing in the wind, or it's carried by the bee, and so you're getting cross-pollination. And so once you're getting cross-pollination in plants, you start to get some of them that come up different. And so you're getting a genetic variation. And so which one I think we'll keep the seeds from the worst one to grow them for next year, because we don't want to eat the sweetest one, do we? You're not going to do that. People are going to say, which one do you think we should save? The kids will tell you, save the sweetest one, Dad. Save the sweetest one, Mum. Save the biggest one. And so then by selection, that you have the apples as we know them today. As people came to, similarly with corn, the corn that came from South America, or the tomatoes that came from South America, the potatoes that came from South America that had been utilized there for centuries by those civilizations, were discovered when Europeans went there in the 1500s, 1400s, and brought those products to Europe. And it's again through selection, and then ultimately then in the last 300 years that we can breed these things and alter the way that they grow. And so it's been happening for hundreds of years that that agriculture became sufficiently sophisticated that people could actually manipulate and test. Let's cross-pollinate hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different ones and grow them, and see if anything really good comes out of it. And so in modern times, in most countries, you see that there's trial grounds typically was with ministries of agriculture, and I remember in Nelspruit in South Africa that there was there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of varieties of mangoes just by cross-pollinating and then growing them and seeing what would become of it. And so this is like an investment in 10 to 15 years of, and so then they're all coming into fruit. Oh, that one fruits early, so that could supply an early market. That one's really big and it's not really suitable for a market. What are the different, and then, wow, here's the perfect new variety. And so, owning that, who owns that variety? And so so plant breeding to produce the new varieties is just been going on for hundreds of years. So some of those things are happening just by cross-pollination to create hybrids. So it's hybridization. What are the benefits? They may be sweeter, tastier, more resistant to disease. So we think about that in perennial fruits, in vegetables, then in grains. And so with rice or with wheat or with sorghum, with millet, different types of grains, different types of chickpeas, different types of lentils, all of a breeding process is going on, and investment by many governments and many private organizations all over the world to think, well, if I can breed a lentil, for example, that is not prone to a particular disease and is resistant, and it would save 6 or 7 sprays of a fungicide to control that disease, I'm on a winner. People will want to buy my seeds. So if a lot of plant breeding has traditionally been done by government departments through the Ministry of Agriculture or the scientific research institutes of different countries. And in many countries, they have moved away from that. So this is a sort of a controversial change that started in the late 70s and 80s to say, well, is this the role of government? Should government policy move to say, well, you're free if you want to have a business where you breed plants, and if you find a great one, you own the plant variety rights to that seed.
Interesting.
So that variety you've created, and let's say...
You could patent it, is it?
You have plant variety rights, or PBR, plant breeders' rights.
Okay.
So it could go from ornamental crops to so government institutions in Australia are getting that themselves, because the government says, well, why should the taxpayers be giving you all the money? What percentage of Australia's businesses are farming businesses? And so we're putting millions of dollars into research about this. Shouldn't the industry pay for that itself?
Right.
If it comes to food security, that's
a national security
That's
risk.
a national security risk. So is eating a sweeter mango a really important thing for? Could we do without mangoes if it came to a push? We probably couldn't do without avocados these days. So there might have to be so where has been government research institutes, and this has been a huge change for people that worked for research institutes or worked for Ministry of Agriculture, not only in plant breeding but in advising farmers, or in that. Well, the farmer has to pay. If I run a shoe shop in town, is someone from the government coming and telling me how to make shinier shoes or how to better market my shoes? No. Why should that happen to farmers?
Yeah.
So really, once food security was achieved, you started to get the good food security for Australia. You started to get this change, and so it's many of the people who were researchers working for the government perhaps in 1975. By 1995, these people had been through a transition. They were still in their workplace, that they moved to then be private consultants. I'm a plant breeding consultant. I might get together with other plant breeders and say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do this work to get the most disease-resistant lentil. That's where there's a good market, because this is how many millions of acres of lentils are being planted around the world. Or they might decide that we're going to make a better and sweeter strawberry, or a bigger strawberry, or so the private sector is investing in this now. Most of that, the vast majority of this is about cross-pollination, so creating hybrids, testing the outcome, and there is innovation in that by looking at what are the desirable genes inside a seed. So let's say 20 years ago, I have to do all my cross-pollination. I have to plant those seeds out and grow them for a few generations to be able to evaluate whether they were in fact better. Are they sweeter? Do they have a higher protein content? Whatever is desirable in that particular plant or crop that you're working with. What's its desirable characteristics in the marketplace? What's its the most efficient production? And have the way I did at breeding, so I have to test and test and test. I cross this one and this one and this one, and I cross this one and this one by putting the pollen from the male part of one plant onto the pistil, the female part of the other plant, and then the seeds form through sexual reproduction. The seeds form in the ovary. I take those crossed seeds then and plant them and see what comes from it. And that's how plant breeding has operated, and think, wow, that one really is better, isn't it?
Oh, okay.
The cross between, it's like, for humans, you think we're going to make a beautiful baby, and that'd be a great combination, wouldn't it? And so it sort of works like that with plants.
And that used to be like a very long process, like decades.
A very long process. So you have to grow for a number of generations. But now realizing, being able to really understand through being able to look at the genes of a seed of a plant, what is it? What are the desirable? We don't want this to be inside the genetic code of that plant. That makes it more prone to that particular disease. Yes, and so being able to do that. Create new seeds from a crossbreeding, either directly from the seed that's been produced, because its full genetic information is inside that seed, is to be able to give it a squeeze, look at it under the electron microscope or whatever they do their DNA testing. I'm not an expert in this part of agriculture, but to see, that gene is not there, that it's much reduced, or so that they're able to make an appraisal much more quickly of what's been achieved by crossbreeding. So this is very different, however, to genetically modified organisms where genes are being removed or injected into different plants and animals. And so that's let's say from an organic agriculture point of view, you may have standards that for the international standard of organic agriculture is that we shouldn't be growing hybrids, so that those, what I just described to you about the crossing of between taking one and the other and crossing that. Some organic standards, and I would say most organic standards, say we don't want that type of manipulation of the genetics. What we want is for our wheat or our lentils to be out there in the open. They're being naturally pollinated by the wind or by the bees. We'll collect those ones. We'll observe improved varieties that will just naturally occur and then propagate those ones. At the same time, you're getting this narrowing. So there's a feeling that the seed industry is narrowing the biodiversity of the genetics of different types of plants and animals. It may be surprising to think that all those black and white cows we see there in the milk advertisements for all over the world, that the genetics is narrowing, really based around milk production. And so the more milk a cow can produce, the more value it's going to be. And then we see, wow, the ones that produce really the most milk are much more prone than not living the life. So we could have expected a dairy cow to have lived for 12 years, for example. But typically in Europe and high intensity dairy farming places, that we see that the consequence of having a very big udder with very high milk production causes the cows to get osteoporosis, and so ultimately that the demand for calcium to produce the milk is eating away at the bones of a cow. And so we would see that a cow, rather than being old mother cow that's like a 12-year-old cow before she finishes her life as a dairy cow, that's pulled back to pay 7 or 8. And so then you look at the average age of a herd. We might have said in our district that when I was a young guy, that they'd say, you know, you've got to keep your balance. You've got to be turning off your old cows and bringing in fresh cows as they have calves, and you select so then you're breeding, so that you're getting either a good bull brought in. So, he was the show-winning bull at our local agricultural show for the last 2 years. We'll get him on the truck. He'll bring him over to our farm, and his heredity he's a
stud.
He's a stud bull, and he gets transported around the district to do his thing. And then there is a realization, we can do artificial insemination, so that rather than having a bull, that you're using semen and you're impregnating the cow. You're bringing the cow onto heat by giving it an injection of hormones that think, I'm going on heat and I'm right for being impregnated. And so that's the system. I would say the majority of dairy cows in Western countries are impregnated through artificial insemination.
Wow.
And there's some big bull there, the big stud bull and his offspring in Canada, that are just this unbelievable proportion of the dairy cows in the world are sired by this few very, very narrow genetic base of male cows whose semen has been collected and spread all over the world, because he produces either good sons that can also go on to provide their semen for impregnation, or for cows that are have a very big udder and produce a lot of milk. And then looking for the characteristic of this, we don't want this cow to be having osteoporosis or having bone breakage problems because of the absorption of calcium out of the bones of the cow as she gets older. So we also want to then, that this is a characteristic that we want to select then, is this bull produces a very high milk producing cows, but also don't have this degradation of the so things like that. So people are looking at what are we trying to breed towards. So a lot of, just to get back to organic standards, to say we don't want manipulated breeding, we want natural breeding. We don't approve of artificial insemination. So if we look at the European standard, for example, and a standard is a way of farming, a set of regulations that sets out, if you want to say that your product is organic, this is what you need to do. And some of that is only open pollinated seeds, so not crossbred or GMO seeds, not artificially inseminated cows. That cows, chickens, pigs, sheep, goats, they should have the ability to naturally create their offspring and not be manipulated by hormones to bring them into season and things like that. And so it is an organic agriculture is that's really grown out of European agriculture in the way we talk about organic agriculture, but really there's been organic agriculture happening all over the world and in Sri Lanka for thousands of years. And so it's that those systems of agriculture are in many ways trying to preserve traditional ways of farming and to try to reduce the amount of technology in genetics and breeding. But when we come to other technology, a drone that could fly over your field, or sensors as you cultivate the land that are looking at your harvest. So new tractor systems that are developed now, that it is recording your crop every square meter. It's recording the yield of every square meter of the land as it harvests it. And it remembers, because of the GPS, that when it comes to planting, sowing the seeds for next year, what are we going to do? We could go to that spot and do a soil test. Look at that. That 50 square meters over there must have been an old termite mound there or something. Do we want to, is it worth our while making a change, modifying that area of the farm to bring it up to the same standard as the rest of the farm? So you could be having an organic system that uses technology to monitor the yields, to test the soil, to look at the moisture holding capacity of the soil, to be in real time reporting back what the moisture levels are, what the temperature levels are, the having traps that are recording pests. Are there pests in my in my field? Even if I have an organic agriculture system, there may be steps that I can take to using approved products that I can use to try to manage that pest to a level that it doesn't impact the economic viability of that organic certified crop. So looking at having an organic agriculture system doesn't mean that there isn't a future, an evolution of that system to use technology, because really, if you use technology to understand more thoroughly what's happening, to understand more deeply what the ecology of is going on in the soil, what's going on in the air, what's the temperature, what's the humidity, this can be to your benefit.
You end up optimizing it, is it?
Even when you look at conventional farming, that the use of robots that are sensing and just autonomously moving over huge fields in Australia now, and I would say that most of the large-scale agricultural areas of the world are very similar, whether it's in South America, in the United States, in Europe, in Canada, that it moves over the field, and rather than spraying the whole field with the herbicides, it's just seeing where is a particular weed. And when the weed is just the tiniest little thing sticking up, so rather than spraying thousands and thousands of liters of herbicide over the entire field. The robot is just seeing one. It's the size of half of my fingernail. It just gives a little directed air burst of herbicide, and so that the herbicide usage for many of those farms is now perhaps down to 1% of what their herbicide usage was previously. And so there are benefits in technology, whether that's in organic agriculture or whether that's in conventional agriculture. In an organic system, you might have that autonomous tractor moving over the field, and with a tiny little gas flame that just goes and burns that seed. So I've just used a little gas flame to make that seed hot, to make that little shooting weed hot and burn the weed that way. So, there are many similarities between the practices that are happening in large-scale organic farming as there are in large. So a lot of the technologies are very same, but when it comes to what is it that you're actually applying on the land, it's not going to be a chemical, or it's not going to be it's not going to be an artificial fertilizer. So I guess that's the difference. And when we look at the promotion of organic agriculture in Sri Lanka as a viable means to create products that are desirable in markets, in local markets and in international markets, there is great potential, both in traditional agriculture systems and then in modern agricultural systems, so that we take that understanding of natural systems and ecology into, whether that's small scale farms or larger scale farms, to be the organic island. It's not a bad idea. If people can be trained, if people can rekindle forgotten knowledge of those traditional agricultural systems that got lost, because in so many countries that I've worked in, that someone will tell you, I went to University of Queensland and studied people who've gone on the Colombo plan or similar scholarship plans to go within the Commonwealth to university, and I learned all about herbicides, and I learned all about chemical fertilizers, and I've spent the last 30 years promoting that. And when you say, listen, my friend, if you went back to the University of Queensland today, they would be telling you not to use those things. Oh, I don't think so. And it's in that you think, wow, the role of the alumni of the University of Queensland from 30 years ago to keep informing people and to keep in touch, to update them, and for the exposure of someone, say, in southwestern Uganda or central Kenya, to, at that time, there was no internet, so it's before the internet. So where do I get information from? I get information from our Ministry of Agriculture, agricultural extension handbooks or pamphlets or field days or whatever. And who is presenting those writing those pamphlets or growing guides or conducting those field days? It's they themselves. And they say, this is the big man, or this is the big woman who went all the way to Australia to study agriculture. So she is the expert. And you think, oh no.
They're talking about a very outdated.
They're talking about where we have moved on. Agriculture has moved on, and so this is where you have a country where perhaps part of a new era is saying we should look at our old ways of traditional agriculture. I was there in the Western country. They told me how ignorant we were. They told us how useless the foods that we ate. Who eats wood apple, or who eats, who eats these sorts of things, breadfruit or jackfruit, or you've got to have modern crops, modern food, and eat like a European. That this is the sort of thinking that post-colonial era had for many countries. And so what we have is not good enough. And this is just getting off the track here, but this is a wonderful thing during COVID to see in Arpico or in Keels to reintroducing traditional foods that are of low value and that someone could still make a cheap meal with. And I thought, well, that was a really good initiative. So, so the education of people that need to be updated, and I guess this is a great benefit of technology, is that people can see on the internet and people can communicate with each other very, very easily and share ideas. And so that adoption of change and the understanding of change, or the awareness of change in anybody's industry, whether that's in agriculture or whether that's in another industry, is able to be, and people respect that. They're not somewhere gone back after a great opportunity to live overseas for some years, to go back to where, and my level of knowledge is capped at when I walked out of that university. Whether that university was here or in the country of origin of that person, or whether it's an international university. And so, when we look at technological change over the last 50 years in particular, that the rate of change, so once upon a time, a person might do an electrician's trades, or they might do a plumbing trade, or they might learn to be a nurse, or whatever they do, that you went to college, you learnt what you needed to know, and then you went and did it for 30 years, and technology hadn't changed. And so it was what you learnt as a young person that did you for the rest of your life. And so really only, I think I probably in the late 80s that I heard the concept of the words lifelong learning, that we have to be continuously learning, we have to be continuously updating. And, whether you do that formally by going back to study to update yourself, or whether you're doing that through being on your phone or online and learning more. And so our knowledge is growing and change is happening at an ever faster and faster pace. And I guess at the end of all of that discussion is that I think there is a great place for technology in all types of agriculture, whether we're talking about ecological systems or understanding traditional systems or rekindling traditional systems and making that analog forest concept that we're going back to the future, but it's not something that's caught. And in some, like in anything, some people are purists and would say, this is an organic agriculture system, and we don't want any, we don't want any telephones, or we don't want any GIS support, or we don't want any this. I'm practicing a traditional agriculture system, and that's what I'm preserving here. It's not it's the practices I'm preserving this. And so when we look at something like and the slow food movement, for example, which is based in Italy, which is very internationally recognized and highly accredited organization that promotes local food. So what's not only the variety of food you grow in your local location, but what you cook with it, how you preserve it, how you make. So it's a celebration of not only food production, but also then the gastronomy of a region. Right. And so the unique products of particular parts of all over the world. It started off in Italy, and then it's grown from there. So not only the agricultural products, the method of production of those agricultural products, and then the foods that the treatments or the processing or the gastronomy of the eating, the food you cook and make out of those products, this then becomes a recognized thing. And so that this is given a geographical location of we acknowledge that this product comes from this place, and then it gets registered in the slow food with the slow food organization as being a unique product of that place. And so then if you can do this, it's like really an extension of someone that comes from Colombo that is driving up the coast and is around Puttalam, and then just gets the most amazing kittul and says, or jaggery or something, and they say, that was so beautiful, that was so perfect, and where did you get it? Well, now we'd say the farmer's name is Suresh, and this is his telephone number, or this is how you can get him on WhatsApp, and you send him a message, and so you develop a relationship with that particular farmer, because that farmer has created something that's to your liking. If you bought it, it was really watery, you think, I think this is watered down and it doesn't have a good flavour. You're not going to share that person's, and so that context to that person, and you're not going to go back and, that farmer says, come on up, next time you're up here, bring the family, bring the kids, and have a couple more hours, I can show you all around the farm, and so that people build a relationship. And so this would local agricultural production, localization of agricultural production and consumers is one of the concepts and principles of the slow food movement, that people should be in contact with who's producing their food and building that relationship. And so it then becomes a social experience for people that, I went up to Puttalam and the kids just loved it, and they had a cow there and there was a little calf, and kids who come from Colombo who never get to touch a calf or see a calf, or there was some kittens there and there was a dog there. And so this then moves, how do we move towards agritourism? And so thinking about that, we start with relationship marketing, or having a unique characteristic to the product that we're producing. And so that's a relationship, because I want the particular one from that farm or from that village because it has the reputation. Certification helps that along the way, because that's an external third party saying, we guarantee that as demand grew for Suresh's kittle, he didn't just go and buy a whole lot from drums and drums from other farmers and bring it and tip it in and put his label on it. There's an ethics behind this relationship marketing. But then how do you add value from the farm itself? We look at the farm and think that the farm is an asset. The farmer is an asset. Years ago, as the dairy industry changed in my home, and I had recently returned back to Australia as my parents' age, and was doing some consulting there, many of the farmers' wives didn't work, and so that was more traditional in like most countries, that by the 70s many women worked, most women worked, all women work. So a typical farm in our district in New South Wales South Coast, you probably see about 50 to 60% of farmers' wives were contributing income to sustain that farm by going and being a school teacher or working in the bank or having a shop in town. And so this was then the family, what's the word? The overall contribution to the family is coming on the farm, is some of that energy in the form of money is coming from members of the family that work off the farm and contribute to the family unit to sustain the farm. So this gives the farm it's supporting the farm. And I know the librarian at one university I was visiting, she said, yeah, I come to work and be the head librarian in the university so my husband and son can stay at home and have fun on the farm all day. And she was just making it, she loved being a librarian, but she was saying, this is the reality. And so that as the dairy industry changed and that government support was withdrawn from the Vena subsidy to ensure that there was enough milk for the children of New South Wales. I think the quota system started in New South Wales in 1937, something like that. And so that farmers who produced milk every day of the year, which included my area about 200 kilometres from Sydney, that you produce milk and we pay you this high price for the milk. Then in the 90s they said, this is coming to an end. We can't have, we want to be, if we are to be a big exporter of dairy products, the World Trade Organization will say, you are subsidizing farms in Australia. It's not efficient. We need a more efficient industry. And therefore, the quota system and the subsidization from the state governments was agreed between all states through the federal government's intervention, that this is going to stop. So then suddenly it's the dairy industry period of change coming in the dairy industry, And so structural adjustment, that's what they call it.
What exactly happened when they
And
decided to stop subsidizing?
So that many farmers, so you had many farmers, and so you had a lot of farmers that had gone into dairy farming after the Second World War. So you had many people who were in their 60s and 70s. So one, they could sell their quota, so the government repaid for their quota, and so that they got a significant nest egg. They could sell their livestock, which would, through that breeding, were a significant asset. They could sell their shares in the local dairy company, and so that people ended up and still hold on to the asset of the land. Others sold the land, sold those things, and sold their land and to a neighbour, so that the herd size tended to go to be the herd size to get a smaller amount of money out of more cows, but overall the farm was more profitable. So you had a tendency to farms to grow bigger. And so what you were talking about earlier about, but we're not talking about large international corporations coming and taking over the entire farm. We're talking about a 300-acre farm turning into a 600-acre farm and moving from, say, 100 cows to 200 cows. This has changed and changed. It's still in local ownership, but I would say the number of cows in a typical dairy, the total number of dairies is perhaps 10% of what they were in 1970, but the size of a herd would be, one dairy might have 3 herds and say have 3,000 cows, something like that. So it has been an expansion. But at this time, at the time of the structural adjustment, what can the women do to contribute to increase the family livelihood? That was the word I was looking for earlier. To improve the family livelihood, but they are not working outside of the farm. We talk about introduce the concept of agritourism. Agritourism? Why would anyone want to come to see our farm? You say, look at you with your blue perm and your 1950s dresses in the 1990s, and your 120-year-old wooden farmhouse and your beautiful garden, and it is just like, this is a beautiful experience. Well, don't think so. What would they come to see? Just to look at you, you look at the beautiful foods you make. You make scones and jam and all cream from the dairy. People can either go on a day walk, or they can come and camp overnight in your barn. We are able to look at, there was government funding at the time, how do we incorporate agritourism as a secondary income for farms. We had about 25% youth unemployment in our towns, so here's a great opportunity to train young people to be guides, and you leave your car parked somewhere, it's secure, and off you go in your group or in your family and walk up the river, visit the farms and cross where you can cross, have this great experience. And at that time, the farming families were not into it at all. It would never work. Nobody would be interested. You're in this most beautiful, picturesque valley. It's a beautiful place. No. Maybe in Italy. That might work in Italy. Yes, it does work in Italy, and it could work here. But here we are many years later, 30 years later. This is a very popular, agritourism is very, very popular in
those same areas.
In those same areas. But it's a new generation of they've not got the same 1950s dresses or blue permed hair anymore, and or aprons. They always have very, very snazzy aprons. A typical farmer's wife in my youth.
You're really selling it now.
And but it's most recently I've been working in Al Ola in Saudi Arabia up until I retired earlier this year, and this has been the full theme of agriculture is the traditional system of agriculture, the traditional culture of centuries and centuries of the cultivation of dates, some types of citrus, some other unique plants of that valley with its springs and its irrigation systems, and incorporating, if people can come to your farm, tourists can come to your farm and buy your product and take it overseas with them, this is the same as exporting things, isn't it? And so if you buy a bag of tea at the airport and or at a farm or at the tea factory where you visit, and you carry that bag of tea to Australia or to the UK or to France with you, you're actually exporting that tea.
Yeah.
And so rather than having to have this huge tea chests being packed or Dilmah packing, Sri Lanka is a huge exporter of tea, that's for sure. So this tourists being able to, visitors to a country, able to take a taste of the flavour of that, to take it home to share with people. And I was at the farm. I visited the farm. I saw how they do it. They had this, I met the wife, I met the family, I talked to the thing. We had lunch. They gave us lunch there, and then I took some of their products, which are all clean and certified and got the standards on them. And here you are. I'm giving you a taste of this experience that I had when I was in Sri Lanka. And then through online purchasing, then being able to send to, you're back at work, it's raining, and it's Europe, and you get it pops up in your social media or in your email. We've got our new season of whatever product that's coming from Sri Lanka is available, and you just have to go like, I think you go like that to you, and order it, and 5 days later, 1 week later, there is that taste of Sri Lanka. Those happy memories that we had. So we generate. This is support to the tourism industry. The tourism industry is a huge opportunity for people. They love to come to Sri Lanka and have food experiences, and then we continue that to be able to continue to enjoy that. People come to my home district, and they're branded dairy products of my district. The dairy factory doesn't even operate in my district anymore. The milk's shipped up to another area to the west of Sydney, where there's still a big milk factory. But our milk from our district is packed in, either made into butter or cheese or cream or yogurt or whole milk or skim milk, and it's all got our local label on it. And so after a lovely holiday on the south coast, we stayed on a lovely farm and had a really nice time and ate some beautiful food, and it was so relaxing and it was so good, and the family were all having a happy time together. And there you are back in Sydney, gotta go and buy the things to take home and cook dinner tonight, and then South Coast Dairy Cream. Gee, it was a lovely time, wasn't it? I'll pick that. I choose that. $5.50? Oh, yeah. And then when you're home having dinner, look, we're eating the one from the South Coast Dairy. Oh, it was really good, Mum, wasn't it? We had such a good time. And so this is the way that you continue the emotions that people feel in their touristic experience through their agri-tourism experience, either visiting your farm, watching a process happening on your farm, or staying on your farm, waking up, being involved in the farm, eating from the farm, and then taking the products home. That's the first experience. Wow, I can actually take these products, and now you're communicating with me all the way away that I can import this product, and it's as easy as that. And so it's really interesting that this is a potential add-on from the combination of tourism, food culture, agriculture to come together and to continue the marketing of products, agricultural products, to higher value markets. That's the thing. And so it may not be the entire income of a farm. So many farms will have, I don't just sell everything I grow, I sell it to tourists, that's all I'm going to do. No, it doesn't happen like that, that you've got different marketing channels. And even if you, how to set those things up, and it just happens organically in a way. And that's another part of organics, isn't it? That things happen organically, that evolves a generation of people now, it's very impressive in Sri Lanka to be able to just buy things online. They get delivered. I often have the challenge of describing to the final driver who doesn't have a smartphone how to get and how to get to my gate. But I have a lot of support services. Hang on, 1 minute. Talk to this girl, and then we get things sorted out. But it's it's amazing. It's absolutely incredible, and it's a great way to buy things that I think Sri Lankans have really embraced online purchasing, and it's really good. And how that across all industries, including agriculture, it's a very positive thing.
Amazing.
If the farmers are able to get organic certification, and as groups, through whether that was, say, through the slow food movement or through the organic agriculture certification organisations within which exist in Sri Lanka, to come together to be able to see how do we get the certified products, so that we can communicate our quality and communicate our value to markets, especially in a value chain that's in the in online and in digital form. Communicating quality is often, that's a risk that someone has to take with a food product, with anything you buy. And overall, I've been quite impressed with well, I think I'll take the risk, and the product that I get delivered to my house has always been a good one. And I'm sure when you read in social media, people say, I paid for this and nothing ever got delivered, and I tried to call them and they didn't answer the phone. So there are the bad experiences that people have, or when it was delivered, it was terrible. But good experiences. But I think you need to be discerning, and as we become more familiar with this way of marketing things, that we can tell by looking at the things or looking at reviews, or
the free market will filter it all out.
That it will come good.
Is
there
this
have to be some tears in the process, I know, but
trial and error.
that's how it sort of works. And but yeah, I see that relationship marketing, the opportunities that are opened up by technology for people in, and so how do I develop my personality? It's like, how do I develop the personality of my farm, of ourselves? You are the asset, and which is a really interesting thing. In my main activity in Sri Lanka is in marine tourism, which is an ecological boat tour company based in Negombo, on Negombo Lagoon, with the community of Negombo Lagoon.
So this is your entrepreneurial
This
aspect
is my
of it, because you're not
entrepreneurial-
just an agricultural expert, you're an entrepreneur too.
That's been something that we have developed together with local family in Negombo over the last 10 years.
But this is not just to be clear, because when I think of boating, I think of fishing, and this has nothing to really do with just going and catching fish for tourists, right?
You could go fishing.
Okay.
And we do observe from net fishermen to prawns fishermen to at the various times of the day. There is all sorts of fishermen on Negombo Lagoon practicing within their traditional culture, practicing what they have always done. There is the catamarans, the near coastal sailing catamarans that go trawling for prawns and squid and things like that. And so, yes, that it's observing those or experiencing those things, but mostly from an ecological point of view. So, and it's a way of, again, there's a culture, there is a fishing culture, and it's that the pressure on the fishery is ever increasing. And so the hard life and the level of income that local families receive, it is like a farmer. Don't be a fisherman's son. We get you to be educated and go and do something else. And so that's just the evolution of the intergenerational change that happens in a place like Negombo, and I'm sure happening all over Sri Lanka, all over the coastal of many places. So it's hard, tough life. It's not always rewarding, fish stocks and seafood stocks are declining in many places. And so tourism to me is something that's a gentle thing. And ecotourism is that we create employment opportunities for young people from a fishing community so that they're able to remain in their community, to remain with their culture, to remain with their loved ones, with their music, with their language, with their festivals, all of those things, but to be able to get a better income.
Yeah.
And like the farmers, like the ladies with the permed blue hair and the 1950s dresses in my home district, talking to the local community in Negombo about the lagoon and the mangrove forests and the boat harbour and the view of St Mary's Church. This is a community asset.
Right. It's an experience.
And it's an experience, an asset, and as in the early days of starting together with the local partner, explaining that you're not a driver. You are the product. You and everything here, your story, your happiness, you know, this is part of the experience that you're selling, and people don't see the value. Oh, it's just the lagoon. Why would anyone want to go there?
Yeah.
And me, why would anybody be interested in me? But after some time, people realize this is amazing. Look at the reviews you're getting on Google. Look at the television that people that come to film you, come and talk to you. They want to hear the story of Captain Fernando in Negombo. And, you know, it's a lovely story. And you see many other boats now on the lagoon offering those services. And you think, well, these ideas, I can't say that it was the original boat tour of Negombo Lagoon, but the development of it, the promotion of it, the getting it out there into social media, getting the reviews, that one of the things that people do when they come to Negombo is go on the lagoon. And that being able to have a team that's well educated about the value of their cultural heritage. How do we talk about our cultural heritage? What's significant, what's not significant? Thinking about someone that's throwing in that, well, you know, oh, you find that interesting? Yeah, of course, that's amazing. Stop the boat, I wanted it. And seeing the guys with the crabs, or explaining what's good about a mud crab, or I'm putting this mud crab back because it's got eggs, and all of these sorts of things. People just find it fascinating. And just to breathe the air, to watch the sunset, to feel, to have stepped out of that busyness of the hotel or the beach, to be in the lagoon, either on a sailing boat or on a motorboat or in a kayak, whatever suits people's activity levels or how close up they want to get with nature. It's a really great thing, and it's like that. And Sri Lanka is like that. This is an asset, that its beauty, its people, but the whole thing is that's what's being sold, and we too much think that what we've got isn't enough, that what we've got, we need a big investment, we need some billions and billions of dollars. Sure, there's lots of things that infrastructure that could do with billions and billions of dollars, definitely. In any country it's like that. But for Sri Lanka, looking at what we do have, what does Sri Lanka have that is of interest to people, and it's nature, it's people, it's food, and it's not just about building, oh, we've got to build a 7-star hotel. Let's run over to Dubai and look at exactly how they do it here, and we'll copy and paste that. That's not Sri Lankan culture, is it? And so how do we make something that's very unique, uniquely Sri Lankan, that's a reflection of Sri Lankan culture, that celebrates and integrates into the nature and wildlife of Sri Lanka, and preserve it in a sustainable way. That's is really that tourism doesn't destroy the landscape, that the need for building a hotel even closer to the beach or closer to the river, that we're not impacting the environment, that we should be having that as number one. And I think that the international market, there are hundreds of destinations from Turkey to Spain to Bali to Thailand. They've all made a big ecological mess of building concrete jungles and thinking, you know what, 50 years ago, this was all coconut palms and natural area, fishing boats. And now it's, what would be a great model would be, oh, let's look at Florida. Let's look at Waikiki Beach in Hawaii. That let's just really destroy our destroy our nature and just make our touristic experience in Sri Lanka the same as everywhere else in the world. And I think that's really, the tourism market is much more mature now. And if you also going to attract higher end visitors, that they're willing to pay for a genuine and decent and ecologically responsible experience.
Are you concerned with over-tourism, and how could you possibly balance that in the lagoon, for example? Is there a quota of people that can, visit? Because that's going to be a problem, right?
Yes. Overall, say for our business, we are registered with the SLTDA, Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, and so it's all good and licensed. Like many industries, the resources of the government are not sufficient to be able to regulate and police all operators. So that's whether you're a driver guide who is not a registered driver guide, which is illegal, or whether you're operating a boat, a converted fishing boat on the lagoon without any type of license, with no insurance, with no life-saving certificate, with no first aid, with an engine that is spewing out kerosene smoke, but that's the industry. How does the resources of an industry enable and this would go across so many aspects of the tourism industry in Sri Lanka and in other developing countries. How does the income generated by that industry enable people to be trained and able to become more sophisticated and safe to be operating at a safe level? Restricting the number of boats in tourism. We look at an example of the number of people that could do prawn fishing on the lagoon. So it's not an unprecedented idea. So that you need to have a traditional right to be prawning on the lagoon. You need to be one of 3 associations based around the parishes of the lagoon. So not anybody could just go on to Ngombo Lagoon and start fishing. You need to be. There is a system, and this, to me, this is the first time I've actually talked about this, actually, but I see there is a precedent of how to manage the lagoon as an asset when it comes to catching prawns, and there could also be in the way that boat tours are operated there. So the number of boats, the number of people, how does that get regulated? But every one of those fishermen who is fishing there has got the right. He's a documented fisherman of prawns on the Ngombo Lagoon from the 3 associations based around the parishes of the lagoon, and they're 2 nights each. And the positions of fishing on the lagoon are also set out through a very excellent and traditional way of choosing your spot. And so just depending on the tide and the current and the wind and all of those auspicious timings that are part of traditional decision making in farming in Sri Lanka, that someone who is so it's a ballot, really, a ballot process. And so who chooses to be fisherman number 53, you're the first one out of the hat. I want position 12, or I want position 26, because I think that's the best spot tonight. And so this process happens, and so it's a very well organized process. And there wouldn't be any fishermen putting out their nets because there's no space for them, and everybody knows who's who, and and so similarly with other uses of the lagoon that are not fishing focused, it's interesting about which parts of the government, aside from the SLTDA, you've got really excellent people in Ngombo in the Coastal Conservation Department, for example, or in the fisheries.
Shout out to them.
So where does that fit together? And it'd be great to ultimately bring a group like that together and to set a standard.
Right.
When we go all over Sri Lanka, to think about, if I'm at a swimming pool, is the lifeguard required to have a lifeguard certificate at the pool? Does a hotel pool have to have a lifeguard? Does a resort facing a beach have to have a lifeguard? Is all of these things? This is about building a mature tourism industry where employment opportunities are created and business opportunities are created for many people that provide the things to do in the tourism industry.
So it's basically systems, and you're talking about creating systems in essence.
Yes, that's right. And whether that comes out of a policy of government, whether that comes through regulation, if you create regulation, you need to be able to enforce that regulation.
Sure.
And to police that regulation. And so what's a reasonable thing? And so much you would see an industry association evolving and saying this is the standard that we're going to set.
Yeah, yeah.
That if let's say, for example, if the marine tourism or boat operators of Negombo wanted to come together to say we'd form an association, and that we would work with government to say how much boats, what would be considered to be over touristed on the lagoon. How do we ensure that we are not? How do we promote the Negombo Lagoon boating experience as an experience that you must do when you come to Sri Lanka, either at the beginning or the end of your tour? How do we make a commitment that we're preserving and improving the mangrove ecosystem? How do we ensure that we're improving the fishery? How we would to work together as an association and say it's in our best interest then and then do you limit the number of people that can join that?
Right.
And say now, we're in it from the beginning.
Right.
And
so
the Fernando family, I don't know how that works. And so that's about. And then how does industry self-regulate itself? And this is also then the maturity of seeing this is in the best interest of all of us. We're not going to fight each other to the end.
Sure,
and
yeah.
so
There's plenty for everyone.
You look at the Hoteliers Association or the different. There's the different tourism organisations and associations in Sri Lanka that to be inclusive and I think that the SLTDA promotes these sorts of concepts that we need to work together. There's opportunities for the big resorts. There's also opportunities for boutique experiences, for very small and medium industry, small and medium businesses in the enterprises within the tourism sector, that all of these can work together. The idea that of the 1970s that, because, when I was being trained in tourism and now I went to see what happens in Barcelona or in somewhere in Europe, and that's what you do. The family comes on the plane, they come and stay in your resort for 7 nights, and then they go back, and you've got them for all their food and drinks. You don't want them to go to another restaurant. You don't want them to go on a day trip. You want to keep them in the resort. And people don't want that anymore. And so, sure, staying and being pampered in a resort with what it's got to offer for a couple of nights and moving on to some different type of experience is probably more realistic. And people need to see what's in the best interest of the industry rather than thinking, I want them all just to stay with me and spend all their money with me. It's not building the real building of a Sri Lankan tourism industry is not going to be built on that most successfully.
So Sri Lanka does have a lot of potential in that regard. What is the name of your business so that people can come visit you in Negombo?
Our business is called Captain Fernando Negombo Boat Tours.
Captain Fernando Negombo Boat Tours.
Yes.
Brilliant.
You can find us online. We have a new internet payment gateway, which makes it very easy to book and buy tours. And we've worked with a really a good process of getting that up and going with Commercial Bank, who are very good, very good partners, I must say.
Shout out to Commercial Bank as well.
Negombo branch, they're a really great
Just
team.
the Negombo
Absolutely. Negombo main branch.
I have complaints about my Kote branch. Just saying.
and yes,
Yeah.
but we are always you find us on Google, you find us on our website, you find us on Facebook and Insta. So we're easy to get in touch with.
Captain Fernando's on everything.
Captain Fernando, absolutely.
James, just before we start wrapping up, I do have a bit of a rudimentary question. Because now this is a huge topic in Sri Lanka, the whole fertilizer issue that we had, etc., etc. And I believe it's about over 65% of Sri Lanka is agriculture dependent. But we are still food insecure, I believe, right? We are still food insecure. We can't feed our entire population. Can you explain to me in very simple terms what is going on? Especially with the whole switch from chemical fertilizer to organic fertilizer, and then suddenly food prices shot up. We don't produce enough food, even though we have small scale farming here. Can you just touch on that and explain to me what this is all about?
It's something that a whole lot of conditions came to prevail in the period of very high inflation in food in Sri Lanka, and for a number of reasons, in that a lot of the supply chains for inputs, for seeds, for fertilizer were disturbed all over the world, and including huge complaints about the supply of artificial fertilizers that are imported into Australia not being available in the season after COVID, just because of things like shipping containers were piled up in some places and not in others. Big boats ships that were carrying containers around the world were put into dock and decommissioned because there just was no demand for that period.
Right.
And so getting all of that up, and so let's say buying a new car in Australia, I know that family members have been waiting 8 months to get 2 years ago to get a new car delivered from being made in Japan. And so all over the world, this was a situation. You had some other impacts in the world. Some of the war in Ukraine, as Ukraine is a huge food exporter, and so a lot of competition for food. And so then we started to get this inflation. Also, in many countries, I think there was evidence that the inflation was contributed to the huge amounts of money that were put into the hands of people to, when COVID first started, was it going to be something that was the disease that was going to be like the plague and wipe out 20%? If 20% of the population, if 20% of everyone that got COVID passed away, the world would still be in complete meltdown chaos today.
Sure.
But nobody knew at that time. In Australia, and I think similarly here, the best thing is stay at home. Stay at home. Just stay at home, and don't be in contact with as few people as possible. We distribute the food, and and the government in Australia gave money to people that became unemployed.
Right.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people couldn't go to work, lost their jobs. People that worked in hospitality, entertainment, sports and tourism, those were industries where there's a huge level of casual employment. The same here, no job. And so that's just where the different things that contributed to the inflation, and that combined here with the financial crisis in Sri Lanka, I think that the major income from tourism came to big zero. The number of Sri Lankans that returned to Sri Lanka from abroad during that period, I think hundreds of thousands of Sri Lankans. So another source of income of revenue is from remittances. Then we look at the garment industry, that so much garment industry was closed. The logistics of moving the agricultural production from one place to the other. So all of these things grew in this most storm brewed with all of these influencing factors, that then on top of all of that, Sri Lanka then didn't have the foreign currency to be able to import things, to be able to import fertilizer, to be able to import other agricultural inputs, whether they were organic inputs or non-organic inputs, or
Didn't matter.
it didn't matter that there were things like fuel and coal to generate electricity, to get electricity supply back on, to get vehicles back on the road. This was a priority for the government, and after the change of government, that it got back on the track fairly well,
Right.
and we saw the inflation went down. I don't know enough about Sri Lankan agriculture to say that it should be self-sufficient. There is vast areas of land that could be developed. I don't know enough about that. But when it comes to talking about, and I'd be really interested to find out about that, absolutely. When it comes to the idea that we could go organic and stop using fertilizers and artificial fertilizers and pesticides, and suddenly we're going to be an organic system just like that, it's not realistic, and to do that. And was it really something that, as a result of, well, we don't have any money for anything and we have been subsidizing and supporting farmers with the supply? It's a role of government in the type of government that Sri Lanka has, is that this is a role of government, is to present to the farmers through support or or through loans, or however the agricultural development process works. But this was a major role of government to supply those inputs to farmers, to grow the food that feeds the country, and suddenly it couldn't happen, and because the money wasn't available. And so was that change just a political decision, or was it a heartfelt desire all of a sudden to say what we need is to move towards an more ecological system of production? I don't know about the answer to that. People would draw their own conclusions. But if to me, as an agricultural ecologist, I think that the aspiration to move more agriculture to an organic agriculture, whether that's products that can be marketed to a specific market that has a demand for a higher value added through being not only a clean and pure product that hasn't been grown with chemicals and artificial things, but also that is being farmed in a way that isn't damaging the soil, that's preserving biodiversity, that's preserving surrounding ecosystems like forests or trees or perennial plant cover. This is what a standard of organic certification is. That's what it is. It's not only the product, it's the system of growing, it's the interaction of that farm with the community, it's workers' rights, it's the human rights of workers, the maintenance of the environment around the farm, the commitment to planting perennial trees to have a certain percentage of the land in tree cover. So all of these things, when you get that organic brinjal and say this is a conventional brinjal, this is an organic, it's all of those things. It's not just the product. And so communicating that benefit to people, there will be people that really want an organic product because it's healthy. That I've got small children, someone who has small children that says, I want to make sure that I'm not filling my kids up with chemicals, residues of chemicals, or residues of artificial things going into this plant. Therefore, I'm willing to spend the money because we see so many incidents of childhood illnesses, that there is a direct connection, no doubt a direct connection, whether it's through food or environmental exposure in urban areas or on farms or wherever people are getting exposed to chemicals. There are so many illnesses that we get, so people may make a decision, I want to buy an organic product. And so being able to connect a person who has a demand for an organic product and is willing to pay for that organic product to the person who's producing that product, that's the game inside there. But it takes quite a number of years to be able to develop the skills.
Right.
It's learning. If you talk to someone who was growing vegetables or fruits or farming generally in growing paddy, that in Sri Lanka, if you talk to their great-great-grandparents, they would have had all of the knowledge required to grow an organic product, wouldn't they? Because there was no
there
was no,
sure.
and what were the yields like? What were the so you know, I think that that knowledge is there, and so we need to be in an environment where we relearn that knowledge. Some farmers who may, from their conviction, maybe it's through their spiritual belief, or maybe it's just through their sense of being at one with nature, say, yeah, I'd like to do that. And so how do you enable them to go through the process of reducing the amount? Maybe it's by some organic agricultural management plans go through a transition. So you might go through a transition of a number of years to learn the skills, to implement the skills on your farm, area by area by area. And then how does a farmer get the nutrients that are required to supply the nutrients that are required?
Yeah.
So if every plant needs nutrients, and so whether you're supplying that through, say, growing other crops like green manure crops in a crop rotation, or having a pasture, bringing livestock back into a farming system where livestock may not have been in that farming system for
Right.
some years, how do you create a model that does create sustainable, ecological, or organic farming in Sri Lanka?
Yeah.
And so, and it's that whole of value. It's the farm within a community. So how do we get the circular economy? So how do we get that waste energy back into the farm through compost or through worm farms, or that recycling of nutrients back to the farm? How do we build communication between the farm and the market so that we're able to generate the highest value of putting the products into the right place? And so all of these things are something that would take some years, whether farmers would come together in village association, or someone says, I want to go this alone. Right. That would be, so it's a long-term process. It's not something that you can just click your fingers. Overnight. And it runs in parallel, and that you gradually develop, and you think it's like getting off being addicted to something in a way. To think, oh, I'm going to stop smoking. So there's some things one has to change if they're going to stop smoking, and it's something some people say, I went cold turkey, and often that doesn't last very long. It's someone that makes change in the way they do things, the way they live, and make a change to gradually reduce. And it's a bit of an analogy, not a perfect analogy, of how you could evolve and transition a conventional farm to an organic farm. I think if we went back to that great-grandfather's time, that great-grandfather, like I was talking about the situation in Kenya, that land gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so often the bit that gets left out is the livestock. In great-grandfather's time, most kids didn't go to school. And so that they were just part of the farming family. And so you either take your livestock, you might take your buffaloes or your cows down the lane, and they eat, or they're on the area that you're resting. So the area that's in fallow, we call that fallow. So that's where they're grazing, that's where they're dropping their manure. And so that the livestock, and they're giving milk, and so that the livestock are an integral part of that farming system. So as the lands get smaller and smaller and smaller, I take out the livestock because we don't have space for them, and kids are at school, and so who's going to follow them around and stop them getting on where my young rice is growing or where my fruit is growing? And so you've lost that labour, the traditional labour of the whole family, of multi-age, of the family contributing to farming life, of that farming system of a family. Right. And so the land gets smaller and smaller, and so the nutrient input put in by those livestock and through that agricultural system of having enough space to be able to rest land for a number of years, it becomes very intensive. So we're growing rice and rice and rice and rice and rice on the same piece of land. We're cultivating it again next season and planting again and again and again. And the way that we're getting our nutrients is bringing them from outside inputs and putting them into the land. So they're the same nutrients. It's not different nutrients. It's just that it's been created through a chemical process and maybe transported for thousands and thousands of kilometers. It's one part we haven't touched on. And then because of the buildup of disease and pests and the pressure of that system, the degradation of the liveliness of that soil. That soil is alive and it has a function. And so then you have the rise of pests and diseases. And so then you have to be spraying and spraying and spraying with chemicals to try to manage those diseases. That's the way it works. But that's reality.
How did we get to that place where we have become so dependent on these artificial fertilizers and chemicals?
Well, I guess the population grew. That the population growth in the world, in all over the world, has put pressure, especially in developing countries that have a high reliance and a high proportion of the population that are living in agricultural areas and relying on farming for subsistence and also for income. And so just that increase in population is an increase in demand for food and the decreasing size of farms, as we've just discussed. And so, you know, there definitely in the world was, I think, a higher level of malnutrition. You know, as a small child in Australia, hearing of the famines that were in India, that Indian people were unable to feed themselves, that in many Asian countries that there was a food deficit. In Africa, there was a huge food deficit. And so just that discovery and understanding of plant breeding in what became known as the Green Revolution, how in the early 1970s the introduction of pesticides, new plant breeding to produce more faster growing, shorter time from planting to harvest. So becoming in an area where you've got a unreliable rainfall, that you can get a crop more quickly. And so it brought a lot of changes and it brought a lot of food. And so that I think it's only fair to say that the Green Revolution at that time really did lead to a increase in the food production of the world. Was there the storage capacity? Was there the logistics? Was there the value chains set up to handle all of that? But I think
certifications, the certifications, that capability, is that around?
At that time, no. Most agricultural certification didn't start until later, though.
Really?
So this is a more of a private sector thing. Though there must have been. You've got from the Food and Agriculture Organization, there's something called Codex Alimentarius, which sets specific standards. And I don't know when Codex first started. Maybe it would have had to be after the Second World War. I'm not sure. I couldn't put a timing on that. But it defines a specification for international trade of foods. And so that's the first concept that say, okay, well, I'm growing and canning pineapple in Australia and I'm sending it to the UK. That Codex sets out a specification. So aside from standards, which are standards might be that a standard sets out, say, a process of growing, the management of the farm and the practices of the farm, the inputs of the farm, and then similarly a standard could be, so that would be a standard of production of agri, whether it's an organic standard, or we have something called Global GAP, Good Agricultural Practices Standards. So there are standards for conventional agriculture as well. And then there's good manufacturing standards. So if I'm going to take my agricultural product and grind it up and make flour and put it in a bag, that I want to see that so there's standards both for the practices of a factory or the quality guarantee of the product. So when I take it to, so those things are set out in Codex, set that out quite a long time ago as a minimum thing. It's not too complicated, but to say if you're going to be trading pineapple, we recommend to the government of that country, if you're importing pineapple in a can, it should have this specification. and that's just a service to the world, and in sort of it's grown from there. But really, it wasn't until the in Kenya we were being certified individually by supermarkets, and so we were exporting both to Carrefour in France and to Marks and Spencer's and to Sainsbury's in the UK, and so they would each come and have their own standard, look at all the conditions on the farm, and that then came together as a group of supermarkets. It was commercially it was commercial private sector initiative to put together GAP, Good Agricultural Practices, and it was originally called Europe GAP. And so members of the EU, which included the UK at the time, came together. Those supermarkets came together and said, we will put this standard. Anything that's being imported either from outside of Europe or even within Europe needs to have this certification, and to get, it's opening the door. You've grown something to this standard, it's been handled in this standard, transported to this standard, and therefore that opens the gate for you to bring your product into our supermarkets. It's not a government standard, it's different to that.
Right. What's the viability of Sri Lankan farmers being able to access these certifications?
Well, I guess this would be something that there are certification organisations already. So there is a Good Agricultural Practices standard existing in Sri Lanka, and there's a number of organic standards in Sri Lanka.
Sure, but if they want to export it to Europe, they would need GAP, for example. So a small-time family farmer here, how would they go about going and getting
Well,
GAP?
they'd need to get into probably in a group certification scheme,
Right.
because it costs money, and this is often a benefit that comes from development partners from countries that need to import things, to think, well, we want to import, or we can't import things from that country because they don't have the level of certification that we require to open the gate into our market. Well, we need the food. They've got the food but don't have the certification. Maybe us as a development partner could come to that country and train the trainers and help set up the organisations that are required to have a sustainable certification system. Now, we might look at that and say, from our post-colonial thinking of needing a handout, we need international aid to help our farmers, our poor farmers, get access to those very generous European or Middle Eastern markets. No, Buster, they're doing it because they need food from our countries.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And so we need to turn our thinking around, is that's not international aid, it's international cooperation. They've got the finance to come and ensure that the food that they want to import to give themselves food sufficiency.
It's a mutually beneficial agreement.
It's mutually beneficial agreement. But we think of all things in that we're on the receiving end from the donors, and it's something that really annoys me in the way that I often talk about post-colonial thinking, because it prevails. We are a post-colonial country in Australia, and so many countries and that I work in have got this mentality of
the pristine West.
Yes, and they're so generous, and they'll give us money, and if we stand with our handout, and so avoiding standing with the handout and finding ways of doing it oneself is best. And it's really, do I need to have certification if the market that I'm selling into doesn't need? The gate is open to come to Keels, for example, I don't know, or to Arpico, or to Food City, to Cargill's. I don't know what standards that they require from their growers to get your product through the gate. And whether you're talking about fresh fruit and vegetables, or you're talking about meat, or you're talking about milk powder, or coconut cream, or whatever, or a packet of tea, a packet of washing detergent, all of those products that are being sold in supermarkets or in any shop, do they have what requirements does that organisation have for that product to be guaranteed, its quality guaranteed, what certifications are required, and every product would be a little bit different. So it's not just about agricultural products. And this was, one of the processes that I've worked through in some years ago, working in Abu Dhabi, to say to the government, it's good to get farmers up to a standard. That's great. So to work on getting good agricultural practice accreditation for farmers, but the farmers are all asking, how do I get more money then? Well, you don't. But this is a requirement of the government if you're going to practice farming. Oh, well, that's no good, really, is it? And so then it's to see that one by one the supermarkets said, from a food safety point of view, if I sell food to a person and they consume that food and they get sick and pass away, that family of that person will come to my supermarket and say, hey, we bought this from your supermarket, grandma ate it, and then she passed away, and now we're going to sue you. And the supermarket wants to be able to say, don't sue me.
Sue my supplier.
Sue my supplier. And it was Mr. James from Negombo. Because we've got traceability on his product, and we had inspected his farm, and it said that he was certified. And so then we say, well, what was it that killed grandma? And I shouldn't make fun of this, but what was the cause of death? Oh, it was a gastrointestinal thing. It was from listeria, or it was from E. coli or something. That would be the typical contamination of food that happens. So we go to Mr. James, and Mr. James says, well, look at my farm. And the Ministry of Agriculture comes and says, it's because of that manure that you used, that compost that you used. It's full of this bacteria. I bought my compost from
Suresh.
From Suresh, yes. That's his secondary industry up there. So I bought that from Suresh Compost Industries. And Suresh says, yes, he did. Here's my docket, here's the lot number, here's my application, all in my farm documentation. And so Suresh says, so they test the compost, and he says, but my compost is accredited.
Right.
It's certified to the Australian International Standard, one of the best compost standards in the world, I'm told. Just throwing that in. So what happened? We've gone and measured. It was a faulty thermometer, so that it wasn't reaching the temperature that's required to kill those pathogens in the compost. So we found the reason. Who's responsible? Now we've got to go to court. So the supermarket says, we don't have to pay. The farmer says, I don't have to pay. Suresh is saying, I don't have to pay because I bought this thermometer and it had been calibrated by this company only 2 months ago. So it's passing the buck and passing the buck. And the court would probably decide that, yes, the thermometer company that was measuring that had calibrated that machinery, it was obviously wrongly calibrated. So they have to pay out a couple of million. But Suresh,
grey area.
You better throw in $500,000 as well. So this works its way through, and once the legal system has taken its costs out of that, grandma's family gets 100 rupees or something like that at the end of all of that. But that's how the process works, and these are the reasons, some of the reasons why. Sure, supermarkets and food sellers in most countries want to meet the expectations and exceed the expectations of their consumers, and so this process of certification, being able to have traceability, enables them to do that. But at the same time, from a legal perspective, it's giving that backup as well.
Interesting. Amazing. James, we'll end with the last question. Do you have any advice for anyone watching, young people watching, maybe those who want to get into the industry of agriculture, entrepreneurship? Just general advice for the audience, especially those under 30? From everything you've learned in your life.
Oh, gee whiz. I've got to compact that into...
You've got to compact it.
Yes. I think that working together and cooperating together is really important, even if the amount of cooperation that people have can be either working together completely or just coming together to consult and thinking about how together they can make a product or a range of products that may have a common identity. I think that it's good to be able to collaborate with others who are thinking the same, share ideas. I think it's good to really be able to build the reputation of a product. I think that's is as important as building that value chain and understanding what that value chain is going to be. Where am I going to sell the product? Is there a demand for the product that I have? Finding out and researching that before starting to just grow it speculatively. And you may grow something speculatively because you know that there's a market for beans or brinjals or onions, and are they the products that you want to sell? But to add value to the product, to grow something of a higher value, that to start off in the local market and then move to an export market once you've got the system right. Because if you're going to go to the effort of exporting something, and your importer gets let down. You told me you were going to send me 2 tons every week on a Friday, and now it's 6 weeks and I've received nothing. That's it for you. You're blowing your chance.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to meet your commitments, to have very good communication, and to really study online what are the opportunities. I think it would be fantastic if there was an organisation for young agricultural entrepreneurs. I've listened to your podcast for Michael Munasinga recently talking about entrepreneurship, and that's really an important thing to do. That to have that support. Often when we're in a new era, and in many ways we are in a new era in Sri Lanka, that the same in Australia. We'd always say, well, what's the government going to do? Well, the government isn't going to do anything. Those days are now past. So what are we going to do? What action can we take? And coming together as a group, building opportunities, looking at, it's easy to say, I'll go and do a course. Well, if you haven't got 6 months or a year or 2 years and the finance to support you up your sleeve, that's not going to happen. But I think the internet, I think there are good, if someone or a group of people are interested in organic agriculture, that there are good organic agricultural organisations and associations with linkages, international linkages, to get those contacts. So I think really researching what you're going to do, and don't blow finance on just speculation. I think that's a big advice. Working together as a group, not feeling what can we do with what we've got. So many of us all over the world think, if only I had $2 million, I would be able to do this and this. I probably wouldn't do anything. I just enjoy the $2 million. But that what can we do with the resources that we have? And this is a really important thing, where it's hard to get finance, and so I can't do anything. What can I do? And as small as it may be, how could we combine together? How do we communicate with the community? There may be someone that would say, if you had a group of youth, for example, in a rural town that don't have their own land, you may find that someone within the community can say, hey, I'll let you have this area of land for no rent for the next 2 years, because you're a youth group that's coming together and looking to develop this. Or I want you to all to put a day's work into the rest of my farm to be able to have access to that. There's things, there's solutions. Use ingenuity, be innovative in your thinking of how are we going to achieve something. And I think that's a really important an attitude of, I'm going to make this happen.
I'm going to make this happen.
Well,
brilliant.
So James, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Most
this
welcome.
Good. Thank you so much.
This is really nice to be here and to talk about these things.
Amazing conversation. Right.
Yeah.